All right. So I'd like to call to order, regular meeting 1345 of the Wachusett Regional School District Committee. We are operating tonight remotely under Governor Charlie Baker's executive action altering the Massachusetts open meeting law. Of course, tonight we are recording as we are live on channel 194 and streaming hopefully on holdentv.com. For tonight's agenda, I'm going to take a couple things out of order. We have with us I believe representatives from Senator Warren's office, and they can only be with us for a limited time. So I'm going to give them an opportunity to address the committee and perhaps take a few questions, and then we'll return to public hearing and the chair's opening remarks. So Nayana, are you on the call?
I know that Amy should be, Ken.
Oh, Amy, are you on the call?
This is Abby from Senator Warren's
Abby,
office.
I'm sorry.
I don't see Nayana on the call, but I can go ahead and get us started. And if she joins, we can fold her in.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. So I'll just say a few things and then happy to take a few questions. So first, wanted to say thank you for having me and reaching out to us. And we want to say first that we're thinking of all the families of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all the others who were killed by police violence and systemic racism in recent weeks. And we want to commit ourselves with you to working for change and working toward anti-racism in all parts of our society, including and especially our schools. And I want to thank you all on behalf of Senator Warren for everything that you all are doing to support your students during this difficult and uncertain time. We know you've been mobilizing to get meals and resources to your kids, and now you're in the position of trying to make very difficult decisions with limited information. And Senator Warren also knows that a huge part of the uncertainty of the next school year has to do with funding. And she wants you to know she's fighting in DC for at least $500 billion in aid for our state and local governments, with at least a third of that going to schools, so that you don't have to make excruciating decisions about layoffs and furloughs at exactly the time when our students are really in need of more support than they ever have been. And she also is fighting to quadruple Title I funding and increase IDEA funding by $12 billion. So that we know the students with the greatest needs, students with disabilities, low-income students have had, in many ways, the hardest time during school closures and during this pandemic, and we want to make sure that they can get the extra support that they need, regardless of what school looks like in the fall. So thank you for having me, and I'm happy to answer a few questions if we have time.
Great. Would people like to raise their hand in the chat, and then I can recognize you? Member Weeks and Member Long-Balil.
First, I just wanted to thank you very much for taking the time to be with us tonight. I know you guys are stretched enormously thin right now, as we all are. And I guess I want to just keep conversation in this part of the meeting kind of focused on that funding that Senator Warren and other senators are working on right now. I guess my question one is, do you have a timeline in mind? As you know, particularly in Massachusetts, we don't have a state budget right now, which already puts kind of us in a crunch of being on a 1/12 budget. And then there's just the question marks on how low the state funding will come in at. So we're really faced with, at the worst case scenario, laying off over 100 full-time employees before we even know what the numbers are. So I was just curious as to if you have a timeline and when we can expect more from Washington.
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had a better answer for you. So the House has passed a package which includes quite a bit of funding for state and local governments, the HEROES Act. The Democrats have been pushing to do similar work in the Senate. Majority Leader McConnell has not been as enthusiastic about doing another relief package. So we are pushing on it. We understand the urgency. We know budgets are due July 1st, and the school year doesn't start in September. It starts now. But we unfortunately, I don't think that there are active negotiations going on at the leadership level, which means that we'd be looking at July, if not later. So unfortunately, it's not great news on that front. And I in my previous life worked at a school district, and I understand how that this budgeting process is not you can't wait until September to make these decisions. But so we're trying to escalate the urgency of that as much as possible. And I think our Massachusetts delegation is fully on board with that. So I don't have someone I can tell you to call, but that's kind of the dynamic of what's going on.
Thank you very much.
Member Long-Belisle? Linda, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. My question is very much in line with Member Weeks' question. I think what I would add is just to make you and the senator aware that there's a statutory deadline in the Mass General laws that requires us to make decisions about laying off what are called non-professional status teachers by June 15th, next week. So layoffs are imminent. And I think it's important for you and for the senator, unfortunately, to know that. And I think that also something I would ask just as an individual is, I've heard rumors that both sides have at times tried to bring in issues that are not directly related to COVID funding, et cetera. And I would just urge all involved from both parties to put those aside and just focus on getting the funding done, because this is a very dire situation. So thank you.
Certainly we'll pass that on, and thanks for the information about the deadline.
Yep.
Member Kirschenbaum?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for your advocacy in this regard. As you know, that this pandemic has just highlighted the inequities that we see across districts. We are a regional school district. We have 5 towns. Passing a budget is very hard. We run on a very lean budget to begin with. There isn't a lot of extra fat to trim off. We were in the process of trying to simply make some minor gains to inadequacies in our budget this year, and now that's blown out of the water. So anything that can be done at the federal level to speed up this process, to bring relief to these towns, especially one like ours that is in some regards a little bit more unique because of the regional, the 5-town regional school district issues that we face. It's really of dire need here. So thank you again for your advocacy.
Certainly hear you loud and clear on the urgency and especially on the equity pieces, knowing that the students who are most in need of services and support are the ones who are going to be affected the most by cuts. So.
Member Haynes?
Thanks. Just to pick up on Laura's point a second ago, the urgency applies not just to this year, but subsequent years as well, because as she rightly pointed out, the gains that we had hoped for a few months ago, those are really trying to make up for a lot of lost time over prior years, lots of lost time. And what's going to happen if we take a huge hit this year, not only does that mean 21 shot, but we're going to be trying to bail water out again for a very long time to come. So it's not just the coming year, but if we can dampen the blow in 21, that means when we can have the potential to recover more quickly in subsequent years.
Absolutely, yeah. We know the projections are bad for the coming year, but they're much worse for the year after. We also know the last recession, it took 10 years to kind of dig out of the hole and get school funding back to where it was. And we sort of just made it back to the 2008 levels. And then, right. And then we're hitting this. And we also have been talking about it in our office in terms of, the students, if you're in 3rd grade right now and you missed years of instruction, or not, I'm sorry, months of instruction, because you weren't able to access distance learning. And then, potentially next year is some kind of hybrid, we're talking about 10 years of academic impact too on our students. So that's certainly the lens that we're thinking about this through, and we certainly appreciate you all bringing it up to our attention.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I very much thank you for joining us tonight. Of course, you're welcome to sit and listen to any more of the meeting. I do echo Member Long-Belisle's comments, though, that while a good bill money-wise was sent from the House to the Senate, it was really a DOA bill that the House sent to the Senate. They knew there was no way that bill was going to pass. So we encourage bipartisan work. There's a huge sense of urgency on these issues. But I thank you very much for joining us.
And this is Anna. I just wanted to quickly hop in. I couldn't unmute myself. My apologies. But thank you for having us on the call. In any way I can be of help, the Senator's Regional Director for Western Massachusetts. So if anyone needs my contact information, please feel free to reach out to me.
And me as well. I work in the DC office, such as it is these days, but on the policy team. So either one of us is happy to answer any questions that come up, and Nyan is a great resource for any kind of state issues as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having us.
Okay. So going back onto our agenda, our first item was public hearing. I have a lot of public hearing that's come in before. I remember who just unmuted themselves, so you're 14th in line, Heidi. So if you can go back on mute, or okay. So so I have a number of public hearings that have been called in to written into the questions of WRSD. So I will read through these. We'll have the public hearing now, and then we'll come back to public hearing later. Most all of these are from students in our district. So these are ones that were sent to the questions at WRSD.net. Specifically for public hearing. Again, I have 13 of them. So I'm going to read through them. So first, if students were minors, I did give them the option, although I have their name and address, of not giving it online. The first is from a freshman at the high school. She notes, as a freshman, I haven't been at Wachusett long, so I haven't experienced much. In middle school, however, I did. Every week, the kids at the back of the bus would be saying the N-word and making all sorts of disgusting jokes about Black people. I was utterly appalled by this behavior, but I didn't know what to do because they weren't targeting any particular students. They were just being racist. We can't sit back and say that this is simply middle school boys being middle school boys. Something needs to be done. I suggest more education. I think ignorance often allows people to justify this behavior. If we teach more about white privilege and treat racial discrimination with more serious, clear punishment, I think that could help the problem. The second public comment, this person did wish their name to be included, by Brady Dow in Holden, Mass. Student notes, this year I graduated from Wachusett Regional High School. During my 4 years, I witnessed many acts of racial aggression inside and outside of the school. When it came to disciplinary action, there was practically none. No assemblies to address videos that had been spread of students saying racial profanities, nothing. I found it rather odd that the school admins had yet to send out an email addressing the George Floyd situation, the Black Lives Matter movement. It came to my attention that Daryl McCall sent an email to parents and staff, but failed to send the email to students as well. I find this wildly inappropriate. Additionally, no Wachusett admin has come out and sent an email to students who have been actively protesting regarding the situation. In Daryl's email to parents, he mentions how the admins read a book in order to learn how racism affects students in a school environment. I ask you this, should school officials really need a book to teach them how racism affects students at school? It is common human knowledge and should be a requirement in order to administer over a student body. Wachusett, please be more vocal when it comes to these matters and please take action. Thank you. The next person asked, which is her name to be used, Tanvi Mandrakar. She is notes, hello, WRSD school committee members. I'm a graduating senior this year. Over the past 4 years at Wachusett, I have noticed there are some things that need to be addressed in regards to race. As one of the few people of color at Wachusett, I feel as if I had experiences that most students have not had, and I would like to share one of them in particular. My freshman year, I was heading to fourth lunch after my choir class when an administrator approached me and told me that I needed to go to class and I had already had my lunch period during third lunch. However, he mistook me for another student who was also a person of color like me. He assumed that my name was the other student's name and did not hear me out when I told him my name was Tanvi and that I belong in fourth lunch. Instead, he assumed that I was lying about my name and my lunch period and accused me of skipping class. I know there are only a small number of people of color at Wachusett, but the fact that this administrator and some of my teachers constantly mistook me for another person of color just because we have the same color skin tone has made me feel extremely uncomfortable. I truly believe that none of the staff have malicious intent, but rather ignorance and unconscious bias. There are definitely changes that need to be made, like educating and diversifying staff, bringing awareness of situations like mine, and catering towards students of color. For example, one of my friends at Shrewsbury High mentioned that every February there is mandatory assembly for the whole school in honor of Black History Month. Although I enjoy my time at Wachusett, I truly hope future Mountaineers can have a more diverse and welcoming experience. Thank you for hearing me out. The next one is from a student in Holden. They say, I just wanted to share a few stories of some encounters with ignorant people in the school. The school district does an amazing job in educating their people on the issues of racism. However, I feel like there is more that can be done. With only a few students, certain issues, small but vital, are thrown under the radar. For example, last year, my junior year, a girl who also made racist comments on social media interrogated me and my friend. She asked why I didn't vape and weren't friends with all the black boys at school. She assumed that since I was black, I ought to be out there and crazy. And that is just not right. A person should get to know me in order to know who I am and not make assumptions based on the color of my skin. The next comment comes from a student from Paxton. She did not respond about whether she wanted her name used or not, so I'll exclude it for now. I graduated from WRHS in 2018 and have since gone on to college, where I learned how much I sorely missed out on at Wachusett. My education on race, gender, sexuality, and religion was entirely based on elective classes and teachers who chose to include these topics in their curriculum, as well as my choice to take these electives. Wachusett's decision to not require core classes to include curriculum on these topics is a huge disadvantage for students going out into the world. I think it would be beneficial to have more core classes, including content that helps educate people on things such as race, religion, and other topics that are often passed over in school. My first teacher who was a person of color was a college professor. I estimate that I had around 43 teachers in my entire grade 1 to 12 Wachusett experience, and that one of them was a person of color. No substitute teachers that were not white. I can't even recall a teacher that I saw in the hallways that wasn't white. We all know that the high school in particular focuses on giving students a well-rounded education. I'm curious as to how only having white men and women teaching students provides a well-rounded education. I won't speak for others, but I hope you understand the volume of racism, sexism, homophobia, and anti-Semitism that goes unpunished and unnoticed by staff at Wachusett. I sincerely hope you take to heart the things that you hear today and ask yourselves what you can do to improve the experience of every student at Wachusett, because there is serious work to be done and future students deserve better. The next email is from Dylan Wynn of Holden. I'm Dylan Wynn, and a rising senior. I would like to detail my experience with race at Wachusett as a Vietnamese American and son of Vietnamese refugees. When I entered first grade, I was labeled as an English language learner. Typically, ELL is meant for students who come from multilingual homes. However, I came from an English-only home. I was just a shy child. The other peers in my ELL class were either children of refugees or other children. I was subjected to 5 years of extra testing and the knowledge that my teachers were actively judging how I speak and write. While my other Caucasian friends struggled with English during elementary school, they were never subjected to the ELL program. When I reached 5th grade, I learned what racial slurs were and heard them come out of white students. From middle school till now, there has only been a handful of cases I have seen in a student punished for speaking, yelling out, or posting a racial slur. And when they do, they're slapped on the wrist and allowed to go on with life without consequences. I have had friends who have been called racial slurs or have gestures such as eye pulling directed towards them. These cases will never be reported because the administration makes it difficult to see any results from it. This unbounded racism and ignorance is not genetic, it's taught. WRSD has played a part in this ignorance. In elementary, we're taught that Columbus and Thanksgiving were great things. We are taught that the civil rights was completely peaceful and was led only by a couple of straight black men, and that the US government didn't try to harm them. In my entire academic career, I have read only a handful of literature by people of color in any of my classes. I didn't learn about African and Asian culture in school until AP World, and ever so briefly in 9th grade World History. Our mostly white suburbia has unfortunately created a world that is severely disconnected to reality. If we do not reform our discrimination policies and increase diversity in our classroom, we will continue a perpetual cycle of blind ignorance and hate. If we wish to see equity and kindness in our world, we have to look back our past and understand our mistakes. There's more. Our next student, who wished her name not to be included, she's a student, says, I was 9 years old in elementary school. Some students in my class made fun of me for having braids in my hair and for the fact that I was the only person of color in my class. Being a person who has been part of the Wachusett School District since I was in kindergarten, the bullying and comments have always stuck with me to this day. I have felt very alone and sad and felt I had no one to talk to. When you're so young, those memories and moments can really have a negative impact on a person, because I know it did for me. In high school, going to a big school was overwhelming in itself, but going to a big school as a minority was even more overwhelming. I had felt better knowing that I wasn't completely alone like I was in elementary, because I wasn't the only black kid anymore, and we could all relate to one another. But even with that, there was still a good amount of bullying that I had faced, and the administration did not go about it well at all. I feel as though the administration needs to do better and stick up for people of color. People of color need the support of the administration, especially the guidance department, more than anything. Reason being because not only do the people of color deal with being the minority at such a huge school, they also have their academics and their sports and extracurricular activities as well. I'm speaking up because I don't want the future minorities that are going to go to Wachusett to deal with the things I dealt with. I don't want my little sister feeling how I felt. The racism and bias in our community needs to be addressed now or never. Our next student wishes her name to be used, Kimberly Union in Princeton. Starts with a quote from Aklia Gross, founder of Equitable Schools, Inc. In order for you to teach your kids the truth about these racist systems, you must first acknowledge that you and the white students you teach are all beneficiaries of its oppression. Lean into discomfort and take the necessary actions to address and dismantle the thoughts that perpetuate these systems. This work is ongoing. It requires a lifelong commitment to introspection, discomfort, and accountability, and will force you to re-examine the world in which you and your white students have safely lived for so long. Dear school committee and Wachusett community, every single choice a school board makes, not just now when it is too large of a force to be ignored, should be informed by diverse opinions. Students must learn about what is happening right now and how all American history has led to the necessity of this movement. During my 4 years at Wachusett, about 16 of my novel-length required reading pieces over 4 years of English, only 2 of them were by non-white authors. Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry and Beloved by Toni Morrison. And I have students who didn't read either. These books both hold strong senses of happening in the past and were discussed as period pieces. This is not a critique of my teachers, but the whitewashed version of what makes literature a classic and considered of equal scholarly merit. Students need a broader worldview and more works to pull from. There must be a curriculum that attempts to teach about racism in an unbiased way. Students draw a lot of influence from their teachers. One thing that should be mandatory is anti-racism training for all public school teachers and administrators. The district should have regularly scheduled assemblies or workshops with guest speakers to address issues of racism, whiteness, and other forms of systemic injustice and violence. I know this last call is not an easy one to make, but to act in solidarity, take police officers out of schools and instead have outside security guards who have gone through anti-racism training. Most importantly, keep updating yourself and listen to Black and diverse voices for all years to come. Reach out and stay connected. Do not let one person speak for the district or shape its opinions. This is supposed to be a world ultimately shaped by education, and we cannot tolerate ignorance at every level. And we'll include for the record a document from Clea Gross. Our next student, Mona Samoda, notes, I was 12 years old when my classmates told me to go back to where I came from. I was 16 years old when the DMV license instructor failed me because of my own skin color. I was 17 years old when a student in my class said, "Look, I'm Black now," just because she had a tan. I was 14, 15, 16, and 17 years old when my classmates used racial slurs. The racism and bias existing in our community needs to be addressed now or never. Our next student also asked that her name not be used, although I have it. She says she is a graduating senior from Wachusett Regional High School, from Holden. It is not my responsibility as an African-American student to be reaching out to you for at least a statement to be released regarding the national problems that we are currently facing. The deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and several others due to police brutality have devastated the Black community and initiated efforts across the country. Is it too much to ask Wachusett to send a generic email expressing support and advocating for change for its Black community? While Wachusett may push for strong academics, I would say it has failed us when it comes to addressing discrimination and discussions surrounding race in our own community. Racism exists at Wachusett, and I and others have even had these experiences both inside and outside the classroom. A majority of this racism stems from ignorance. Non-Black students and sometimes teachers often do not understand what Black people go through every day, and from the curriculum that is lacking Black perspective. Why is there only one Black teacher in our entire high school that boasts a teacher-to-student ratio of 1 to 15? Why isn't there someone I feel comfortable speaking to after experiencing a racist act? I've been called the N-word by a non-Black student, and I have listened to people ignorantly assume things about Black people while always feeling like I'm outnumbered. Do you know how much stress this has put me through? How much discomfort and disappointment I've gone through because I feel like an outsider? This is not okay, and Wachusett's silence surrounding the current events has emphasized this sentiment. Our next statement is from Sarah Shea. Dear school committee, as the news of George Floyd's death and the resulting protests have been sweeping the nation, I have been examining my own implicit biases and blind spots regarding race in America. While I appreciate the education I received at Wachusett for so many reasons, all of my teachers were always enthusiastic and had their students' best interests at heart. And my years at Wachusett prepared me well for the academic demands of college. I feel that some of the blind spots I have about race in America are a result of the fact that discussions of race were largely ignored in many classes in Wachusett. Because the majority of the student population at Wachusett is white and white privilege exists in America, the students at Wachusett never had to consider how their race affects their daily lives unless they are directly confronted with information that demonstrates the effect that whiteness has on their lives. In my experience at Wachusett, the closest thing to an examination of race in modern America was learning about the civil rights movement in US history too. But even then, we were never asked to consider how racist policies like redlining continue to have effects today. We simply learned that there were protests in the 1960s and Black people earned more rights. While there are some classes at Wachusett in which race, gender, religion, and class are analyzed more thoroughly, such as other voices in American literature, contemporary American culture, and women's voices, these classes are electives. And thus, if students do not wish to engage with this material, they do not have to, and thus fail to learn about systemic inequalities that continue to exist in America today. This needs to change, as the only way that equality can be achieved in the future is if everyone does their part to dismantle the systems that exist to perpetuate inequity. And if people do not understand how these systems work or that they exist, then they cannot work towards a brighter future. As such, I ask you to examine the curriculums of the required classes at Wachusett and incorporate deeper analyses of the effects of race, gender, class, and religion in America, both throughout America's history and continuing today, so the future Wachusett graduates leave with the knowledge they need to help make America a more equal and just place. Our next student, Gloria from Holden, says, I was 6 years old when I was bullied because of my race. I lived in a predominantly white community in Belgium, and there was barely anyone who looked like me in school. Did not have straight hair or pale skin, which made me a target to bullies. I was made fun of because of my hair, constantly told that I was not attractive, pushed around countless times. These things made me feel really isolated and insecure in my identity as a Black girl. I vividly remember this one instance where I was punished by my teacher for something I had not done. My classmate, who was white, insulted my teacher, saying that she looked like a cow. As I turned to tell him that he could not say such a thing, my teacher assumed that I was the one insulting her. I explained to her the situation, but she would not believe me. None of my classmates came to my defense, so I was punished, and my Caucasian peer wasn't. At that point, it clicked to me that I had no credibility whatsoever in the eyes of my teacher because of my skin color blocked her from actually listening to me. These are just some of the fragments of my experience with racism. There have been so many. As a kid, I wished that the adults in my school paid attention to what was going on. No one seemed to care, but it doesn't have to stay that way. As a community, we must keep our eyes and ears open to injustice. The racism and bias existing in our community needs to be addressed now or never. Our next student says, from Rutland, says, hi, I'm emailing in regards to the school committee meeting tonight, and I wanted to testify some of the racist incidents or inappropriate actions by police on campus that I personally have seen at school over the past 4 years I've attended the school. There were 2 students I knew who were very notable, and they constantly used the N-word with a hard R on a daily basis. There were several incidents I myself witnessed during lunch where one of them would occasionally scream the slur at the top of their lungs. During every instance of this happening, either no discipline was used or a monitor administrator would verbally scold the student with no further action. Often when administrators during lunch were monitoring, they would occasionally follow students into the bathrooms if they appeared to be suspicious. They looked like they were going to the bathroom to sell drugs, vape, or do other activity which was not allowed. I remember that they would follow the Black Latino students into the bathroom to check in so much more than the white students, with emphasis on so. Oftentimes they would station the in-building police officer to go and stand in the bathroom for some set period of time, with a gun, mind you, watching the students while they went to the bathroom to make sure that non-allowed activity was occurring. I have more. Next student says, I was 2 when I learned that the peach color we used when coloring was called skin color. I was 7 when I found out I was pretty for a Black girl. I was 16 when I got my hair cut short and my parents told me that I couldn't wear the hood on my sweatshirt when I was driving because I might be mistaken for a Black man and get shot. I was 6 when I began to think that straightening my hair was the only way to make it look pretty. I was 17 when I realized that my curls are beautiful. I was 15, a freshman, when I walked past a group of kids at a football game who said the N-word as I went past. I was 10 when I found out that all my people eat is fried chicken, cornbread, collard greens, watermelon, and Kool-Aid. I was 11 when I said something to an adult and they told me I must be out of my cotton picking mind. I was 12 when I learned the slaves picked cotton. I was 8 when I heard that in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I was 11 when I found out that he got his destination. He pillaged, raped, and left those he found for dead. I was 14 when I found out that only Black people can say the N-word, but then it's racist. I was 16 when I realized that the argument was stupid. I was 11 when I found out Black Lives Matter. I was 11 when I found out that all lives matter. I was 11 when I found that if I believed in Black Lives Matter, then I was racist, because how could only Black lives matter? I was 15 when I realized that argument was stupid. I was 19 when I found out that I was scary or intimidating. I was 16 when I realized that argument was stupid. I'm sorry, I'm losing my track here. I was 16 when a teacher explained to me that it was not a matter of if whether or not I was scary or intimidating, but rather a matter of who was scared or intimidated by me. I was 4 when I wanted to bleach my skin so I could be pretty and white. I was 17 when I truly and fully realized how beautiful Black is. I was 7 when I found out that I had to be the sassy friend of the group. I was 8 when I found out that I should be good at braiding hair. I was 3 when people started touching my hair. I was 13 when I started telling them to stop. I was 16 when there became consequences for those who didn't want to listen. I was 17 when I found out that people touching my hair because it felt good or looked cool was racist. I was 9 when people started to tell me how much older I looked. I was 9 when people started to tell me how mature I was for my age. I was 15 when I realized that I was so mature for my age because subconsciously I'd realized that I didn't have the privilege of having that same childhood innocence and ignorance as my fellow fair-skinned classmates. I was 12 when someone first asked me for the pass. I was 11 when I found out the fact that I lived in a house in the suburbs was shocking. I was 11 when I found out the fact that I lived with both my mother and father who aren't divorced was shocking. I was 16 when my uncle told my cousin, who was 5, to come home from school crying because she didn't want to be ugly anymore. She wanted to be Peach so she could be a princess. I was 17 when my nephew, who was 6, had a nightmare about cops shooting at him. I was 16 when I found out that what white fragility is. I was 15 when I found out what white privilege is. I was 17 when I found out that our criminal justice system is based on racial oppression. I was 7 when I found out what police brutality is. I was 17 when a girl in my class asked what the cross burnings were. I was 17 when she didn't understand why that was offensive. I was 14 when I found out who Jane Elliott was. I've been hearing from white people over the past few days that they are burnt out from all that has been going on in the media regarding the race issues of America. It's been nonstop and bad and saddening, and they don't know what to do, and there's so much happening. I would like to say that if you're listening to this as a white persona and you feel yourself feeling the same exhaustion, the same disheartening feeling, then cry me a river. There isn't a bone or cell in my body that feels any sympathy or empathy for you. If you're exhausted after 2 weeks and you're looking for someone to complain to, please take it upon yourself to leave people of color, especially Black people, out of that mess. We're not the same person, and I can understand that we have not lived the same life, nor have we had the same struggles. But being worn out after 2 weeks of media heavily focusing on one of the most institutionalized, prevalent issues in our country, issues that I and many other Black people have had to encounter since early childhood, issues that personally I have dealt with for 15 years of my life and will probably have to deal with until the day I die, your 14-day weariness is frankly pathetic. Wachusett Regional High School is a school filled with majority racist white students and staff who sit back and let the injustice occur, with the exception of only 3 teachers I know of. When I say racist, I don't mean students who are ignorantly microaggressive. By racist, I mean students who engage in covertly racist behaviors that they either know are wrong or are told are wrong, then instead of growing as a person, continue with such behavior that they know is racist. What doesn't help is the students of color don't know what they can do about it, because either they are not taken seriously, the person they tell is uninformed, and doesn't know how to handle the situation, or they do tell someone but the situation isn't dealt with correctly, so the racist behavior continues. Only on rare occasion do I see racial injustice happen and the proper measures taken to actually help the situation. And that fact not only scares but disgusts me, as it should you. As you all know, the curriculum has been so bleached out that I'm sad to say that when I finally read a piece of literature by a Black author that wasn't about the struggles of Black people, but just a regular story, I was 17. And up until that point, I didn't know that those kinds of stories existed. In my memory, I cannot recall one mathematician or scientist of color. I'm sure they exist, but I've never heard of one. I mean, I don't know, maybe they don't. What I'm saying is that the curriculum needs changing and inclusion of people of color, different genders, different religions, different backgrounds, because if I hear one more straight white cisgendered male being an important pinnacle of American culture, I'm going to lose my mind. Jane Elliott, in my opinion, is an amazing woman, and if you don't know who she is, when you go home later, you should research her. See the experiments she does in order to make privilege get a sliver of a taste of what it's like to be a racially oppressed person. Her tactics by many have been labeled as harsh or as bullying, but I'm glad she does the things she does the way she does them, because the hatred doesn't stop when you get tired. The hatred stops when the system is changed or you die, whichever comes first. I'd like to leave everyone with this, with a clarification that I do not apologize for my aggressive tone. I have sat complacent for too many years and stayed quiet on too many issues or to beat around the bush and to fill my open letter with euphemisms to excuse them. So those are the voices of our students and our graduates. I wish that those voices were in their own voice, and I'm humbled to have been the person who reads them. Yeah. So, again, thank you for sharing. And again, I'm sorry that they had come from my voice and not yours, but they have to be heard. All right, I know Heidi Leahy also requested to speak at public address.
Ken, is it possible that out of respect for our students and their voices, I could defer? Are you going to have a second public comment later in the meeting?
That's the plan.
Okay,
we have a
then
full-
I would like to do that out of respect for those students, their experience and their courage. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, next item on the agenda is Chair's opening remarks. I don't know how anything I can say really to follow that, but we need to continue on our meeting. So tonight is my final Chair's opening remarks, as I'm term limited from continuing as Chair in the Chair's role after 4 years. So I hope you can indulge me just for a moment. First, I want to thank those who have served on the committee and are not on the ballot for re-election. Although there are many empty seats, and we know where you live, so we can write you in. Scott Brown, Mike Dennis, Amy Michalowski, Steve Godbout, and Melissa Ayala have served the committee with distinction and spent many hours volunteering their time for the good of our community. I'd also like to thank our senior student rep, Brianna, and wish her the best at RPI. Thank you all. We've accomplished a lot over the past few years. Highlights include tuition-free full-day kindergarten, occupying the new Mountview and a new turf field, and a budget detente with the towns that led to avoiding 1/12 budgets for the past 3 years. Fortunately, we in the whole state will find ourselves in a 1/12 this year. We saw progress in school and social and emotional learning with new problems like Bright at the high school and the addition of middle school counselors. These gains were driven by a strategic plan created by many community stakeholders and strategy-informed plans for staffing, tech, PD, and textbooks. And our district and our local advocates and legislators led the way in pushing for foundation budget and funding reform, which resulted in the Student Opportunity Act that held such promise. That said, this year has been rough. It started with the EEE threat, which changed the nature of our fall semester and feels like about 100 years ago. Then in March, our lives were upended with COVID-19. Some in our community have lost their lives, including Detective Sanji, who we all mourned last week. Others have lost their jobs, have lost time with family, have lost their sense of community, and potentially have lost some degree of hope that we can return to normal. At the same time, recent events have reminded us that the old normal was also one defined for many by racial inequity, discrimination, and injustice. I appreciate the superintendent's call to action he sent to families last week, and I really appreciate our students' voices tonight. There are our students' voices. As a district, we've had to do more to recognize how implicit bias and racial inequities affect equal access to education and how existing structures and curriculum may need to change to provide that access to all. We have to do more to teach our students that Black Lives Matter, that those in a position of privilege have a moral obligation to recognize their privilege and do the hard work to promote equal opportunity. We need to send our students and ourselves on a path to words and actions, not just to words. At the same time, we also need to help our students discern and learn how they best use the power of their words in ways that spread love and change and don't spread hate. There's a lot we can do better for the district, and the future of our communities depend on it. We also end our year, my last meeting as chair, with one of the hardest meetings we're ever going to have. We face a statutory deadline of June 15th for administration to deliver pink slips to non-professional teaching staff we may not be able to retain. Commonwealth faces a potential $6 billion deficit next year, and that pain will be passed on to towns and municipalities, including regional districts like ours. If we don't see federal support, we may lose everything we've gained and then some, up to 10% of our staff in a time where our kids have more needs than ever, needs to make up what they missed this year, social and emotional needs from the traumas of this year, and missed education services for our most needy students. We also end our year with no real idea what the future will bring. The district has formed a planning committee with a variety of stakeholders, but it's hard to build a budget when we don't even know what we're doing next year. Is it in school, remote, a hybrid? It's not 10 students per class like we heard today. The virus and our actions to suppress it are in charge of our timeline. We must plan for all contingencies, and that's not easy work. We also mourn the things that may appear trivial to some facing life or death situations in our world, but every loss has a right to be mourned by those who experience it. Our high school seniors lost prom, lost spring sports, plays, recitals, and a traditional graduation. Their futures are also more uncertain than in recent memory, and who knows what colleges or employers will do in the fall. Elementary school and middle school graduates left their schools without a walkthrough and without a ceremony. They didn't get to tour their schools for next year, and if they start on campus, they will do without much of an in-person orientation. Their parents missed those events. Next year's juniors probably have it the worst. Our graduating seniors did get most of their senior year. Our juniors most likely will not. We need to make sure we treat them as specially as we did this year's graduates, because they have a tough road ahead, including a summer with no traditional college tours. So yeah, not an inspiring final chair's remarks. This is our time to decide how we emerge from this crisis. There is much we took for granted, even just being in community with our neighbors and loved ones. Hopefully you emerge from this experience with a new appreciation of these values. Perhaps with this time for additional reflection, we can emerge better willing and able to help our students discern how they can make a life that will bring good justice and value to the world. Perhaps we emerge with a newfound commitment to walking with the excluded and turning good words into good actions. Perhaps we realize that our mission as a district is a journey with our youth and use their energy and passions to fuel our own. Perhaps we have a newfound commitment to caring for our common home and realize that without a focus on environmental sustainability, that the next pandemic or war for food and water or species extinction is all but guaranteed. As a committee, I hope we move forward with a newly invigorated hermeneutic of generosity, trust that our colleagues each have the best will in their hearts, regardless of whether we agree with their positions, until they prove us otherwise. And tonight we have a wicked long agenda ahead of us. And we're at 7:44, but it was important, I think, that we heard the voices that we heard. We will have another public hearing at the end of the meeting. As more comments may come in. All right, so Member Silva asked if we can comment on the first public hearing. We can under the superintendent's report. The public hearing usually isn't a give and take, but if there's comments students that people wish to make, they can do so under the report. Next item on the agenda is the students' representative reports. Rihanna, if you have something for us.
Yes, I do, but Leah, do you want to start?
Sure. So on May 28th, we had music awards that were broadcasted, and you can watch them now on holdentv.com. There are academic awards coming up on Wednesday, and they can be viewed on the website. And this Friday is officially our last day of school, but it is Monday for Mount View due to the extra day that they had off. So happy last week of school.
And then we also last week had some of our events for the seniors. So I don't know if any of you made it out, but we did have a gorgeous LED sign in the center of town last Thursday, and the school was lit up in green and white. And so I know my fellow seniors really appreciated that. And then over the weekend, we also had the rolling rally parade for the seniors. I saw a couple of you there, and so I really want to thank everyone who made that possible for us. I know graduation didn't really look like it was going to happen, and everyone has still made it something special for us seniors. And so coming up a week from Wednesday on June 17th, there will be a virtual graduation ceremony for the seniors, I believe at 6 p.m. I'm not positive on that, so I may be wrong. And then the seniors will be picking up our diplomas on June 18th. And there's been a large issue, as we've heard, that's really come up in the past 2 weeks. Many students have approached me, and I knew it was absolutely necessary that I make this statement. And I know we're running a little behind, so I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. And so I'm sure all of you have heard about the protests and marches after the murder of George Floyd exactly 2 weeks ago from today. Many of our own students have joined these protests using their voice to demand justice against police brutality and to support the Black Lives Matter movement. And many students, alumni alike, have also spoken out about their experiences in the Wachusett district. And I also want to truly thank every student who shared their story tonight, to really show what it's like for those of us who don't live the same lives. And so this isn't an issue that I recognized on my own. I don't spend every day of my life being judged for the color of my skin. I don't live my life pretending to be someone else just to seem normal in our community. I'm not afraid to go for a run, to go to Walmart, to walk home, or just to be in my own home. I don't receive hateful comments and derogatory slurs from strangers. I don't face harsher punishments. I don't live my life afraid to speak out. But I'm white. According to the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, exactly 2.4% of students in the district are Black. 13.8% are students of color. The remaining 86.2% are white. Since the protests began 2 weeks ago, many students, as I mentioned, have spoken up about what they face, the experiences they go through just every day, just because they don't look the same as that 86.2%. How they have to be friendlier so they don't seem intimidating, or how they feel singled out by their peers and authority figures alike. And one student even said, "I grew up in a white saturated area. There's certain things you have to do in order to be able to adjust to that kind of environment. You have to pick up different mannerisms, just of survival, in order to exist." I don't see how they face harsher consequences than their white counterparts. My friend and I did it together. He got a detention. I got suspended. I'm Black. I don't see how teachers tiptoe around certain subjects like slavery and racism for fear of being racist. How they have to prove themselves before people are willing to trust them. Another student said, "I know my fellow people of color in the Wachusett area make up a small percentage, but this problem existing in our own community is important to everyone. It needs to be addressed now or never." Others, just outside of that community, have spoken out about what they've seen but never experienced. One student shared that they saw one white guy call his best friend the N-word because he thought it would make him seem cool. Another, "I see racist acts daily, yet no one calls them out for their unjust actions." And we'd all like to think that it's not us or not our community, that we could never be that way. Yet we failed to recognize and address the racial bias and discrimination within our own schools. It's been 2 weeks since the protests began. Today was the first day I heard any administrator acknowledge these events when Mr. D posted a short video on Instagram. That's 14 days of radio silence about an issue that every student has seen across the news or heard one of their friends mention. And yes, I do recognize that an email was sent out to parents, but what about our students? Are high schoolers ages 14 to 18 too young to talk about racism? How about middle schoolers, ages 11 to 13? Do you think they're unaware of what's going on? Or our elementary schoolers? Do you think they can escape being taught how other students are different just because they don't look the same? Because I sure didn't. Racism in our district is a systemic issue, and if it weren't such a taboo subject, we could have conversations about it. But kids are afraid to say Black or person of color for fear of being called racist. They can't even recognize how their ignorance is inherently racist. And if we as a district didn't ignore their history, then maybe more students would understand that Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that all lives don't matter. Maybe they would recognize that every day Black lives are threatened by society in a way that the rest of us might truly never experience or understand. Maybe if we had these conversations in every grade and with students of every age, then my classmates wouldn't grow up hating others for the color of their skin. And there's obviously so many more things to address than I have time for right now. But we as a district need to do better than this. We need to teach our students what racism is and that it's okay to talk about it. And we need to act when discrimination occurs, not sit by and watch. We need to stop ignoring their history if it's something that's never occurred. We need to help students, teachers, and faculty members alike, help them recognize that unconscious bias exists. And we need to make them aware of what students of color face, especially when that 86.2% will never feel it themselves. And the biggest thing we need to do is educate ourselves, educate the teachers, faculty, and educate our students. And I wasn't able to really recognize most of this until I had someone else approach me about this whole issue. And if you don't mind, our former student representative, DJ, would like to say a few words about the issue. I'm not sure a bunch of you remember him.
Just 1 minute. A member has a point of order. So Member Lavoie mentions that Fring says the public comment has already happened, is what he's saying in terms of this is supposed to, I suppose, be Rihanna's report. Is this going to be brief?
Yes, let's keep it brief.
So Ken, I for one, would have no problem, making an exception, given that this is part of Rihanna's presentation, and quite frankly, I'd love to hear from DJ.
I would also echo that point, and I don't care if it's long or short.
Make that 3 of us.
Okay.
Agreed.
And many others, I'm sure.
Yeah, many others.
Okay, so I, as truly as chair, I'm going to make a ruling to allow it. If people want to make a motion to overrule the ruling of the chair, they have that option.
So may I begin?
Yes.
I deeply appreciate you allowing me to speak here tonight, and I also appreciate the support that I got from the committee, which I served as student representative on for 2 wonderful years. I'm sorry that I haven't kept in touch, and this is the first time that we've been reintroduced since I've gone off to college and been away from the Wachusett community for last year. But I did want to address some of my thoughts and some of the things that I've already said on the topic of racism, and specifically racism in the Wachusett community. Last week, when I was caught up in all of my thoughts about how to fix structural racism and how to end police brutality in the United States of America, I came to the stark realization, or stark remembrance, really, that where I live, Holden, Massachusetts, a town that was 97.3% white the day that I moved 10, 11 years ago when I came to this community from Worcester. This community really it misses the mark on racism in a lot of ways. And I went on Instagram, and I didn't expect it to get a lot of attention. I really just wanted to give my thoughts on what was going on, and also fill a bit of a void that was left by Wachusett administration as far as there not being a statement out about what was going on. And I just gave my candid, honest thoughts. It wasn't a prepared speech or anything. Shared a little bit of my story with people, and it got a little bit more attention than I was expecting. A lot of people viewed it, and a lot of comments were saying about how nobody realized that racism was such an issue in the community, because it wasn't something they really had to think about. And that is something that I understand as it is I was the one that said in the statement that it's saturated white community, it's incredibly, uniquely non-diverse community, which is unfortunate. But I understand that people wouldn't necessarily know much about other cultures when they aren't exposed to them. But I also said that that's a bit of a failing from the school district and its education of students. I think a lot of what I have to say about that, about the discrimination I have faced as a student, I think a lot of that was covered in the public comments. I can echo a lot of what they said. I remember when I was in 5th grade, we had kindergarten buddies, and they would refer to the apricot, the peach-colored crayon, as skin color, which is something that seems benign to a lot of people, but is actually incredibly offensive and damaging because it teaches from a young age that this is the standard. That white is the standard, and brown is brown, but apricot is skin color. So it's letting them know subconsciously what the way things should be. You know? So that for me, I went to kindergarten Worcester. I hadn't fully experienced that from the start of my education, so it took me aback. Even though I had already experienced some microaggressions from my peers, even just in 3rd, 4th grade. But continuing, I got a lot of people asking what they could do. A lot of white folks asking what they could do. And to be quite honest, I don't have all the answers. I'm 18 years old. I'm figuring my life out right now. I'm only coming to a lot of these realizations about the community, about what I can do to help. And I think that I'm only coming to these realizations because I attend Howard University, which is a historically black college, historically black university in Washington, D.C. And there you receive a full and comprehensive education, and you are required to take an African American history course before you finish your matriculation, before you graduate. And learning, and I took an Afro course this most recent semester, and I was learning that the way that African American history is studied is not it's not the same way as I learned in the Wachusett school district, where everything at Wachusett is through a white lens, more or less. So we learn everything from a white perspective, and like I had said previously, that's a failing. It's a failing to the students because it leaves them lacking a diverse and full opinion on a lot of things, and they don't understand things as well as they could, and they could end up going to college or going into the career field, having just ignorant assumptions in their head because they just simply don't know anything about the rest of the world around them. And I say a lot of this, it sounds like harsh criticism on the school district, but I don't think that all of the criticism can fall on the school system itself. While it is very important to raise and educate youth to be inclusive and understanding of lots of different cultures, I think part of it starts at home. If you have parents in the home who are not accepting of other cultures, other belief systems, then that's going to end up being damaging to a child. And I don't mean that everyone in Wachusett needs to conform to everything that I'm saying, but what I'm saying is there are some things that aren't a matter that people in this community believe and hold on to very tightly, and that ends up rubbing off on their children. It ends up rubbing off on the community. The way things are in this area is often described as a bubble, and people would always say that, and it ended up being kind of a buzzword while you're in high school. It's a bubble. It's a bubble. And I would hear that and I'd just be like, yeah, okay, sure. But then I went to school far away, surrounded by people who look like me instead of people who do not look like me. And I could fully understand how the term bubble is perfect to describe this community because it's a fragile understanding, fragile concept of reality that is in no way representative of the world as it is as a whole. And I've been asked what I think is the best way to fix it. I don't know the full answer, but just to echo what Rihanna was saying, education, educate yourself on what to do about this. I'm learning myself on how I can articulate how people can do better, how I can do better, and I just think that Wachusett needs to be. Wachusett it's had several missteps as far as race goes, and it needs to correct those. And I can't obviously insert myself into every decision that the district has made and that the committee has made, the school committee has made. But I think about things like eliminating school choice. That seems like it's just a boilerplate district decision. But what that really is in the state of Massachusetts, 86% of Black and Latino families own homes in just 5 cities, with obviously none of the Washington towns being included on that list. So eliminating school choice ends up becoming extremely exclusionary, even if that's not the intent. And that further limits diversity in an already lacking and diverse area. And that's just one example. And I'm not saying that I know everything that went into that decision or anything, but it just goes to show a possible area of improvement. And I said in my statement last week that I still call myself proud to have gone to Washington. I'm a Mountaineer for life. I said that. I enjoyed, for the most part, my time here, but the entire time spent at Wachusett had daily microaggressions and just undertones of racism and a lack of empathy and what I described as a deep sense of loneliness. Because I think, as one of the other public statements had said, you're really the number of people of color at the school is just so incredibly low that there's nobody that you can talk to about the things you do. And if you don't even fully understand, you won't fully understand what you're experiencing is not okay, because nobody around you is telling you that it's not okay. And everyone around you thinks that what's happening is just normal. Everyone around you thinks that touching your hair or making certain comments about how aggressive you are, saying that you talk white. People think that saying that type of thing or doing those types of things is just okay. They think that it's normal. And it's because of a fundamental lack of understanding and a lack of empathy, a subsequent lack of empathy, because there's no frameworks by which these folks can understand it, because there's simply just a majority white, a vast majority white community. And it pains me that it takes for me to reopen my wounds, or it takes for students of color to share their story, young people share their stories of pain and hardship growing up in this community, for people to fully understand, hey, maybe, just maybe, we're doing a couple things wrong. We need to improve. And hearing a lot of the public, the statements from the other students, and those things, absolutely heartbreaking. Because honestly, we all, students of color and Wachusett community, suffer in silence. And you don't hear about it from other students of color. And that was the first time in mass that I've heard a lot of kids sharing their stories like that. And that's hard, because that's what I had to go through And there's a bit of guilt for me when I sat on this committee as student representative for 2 years, and I didn't bring up any of these issues, which were still prevalent, which are prevalent now and prevalent in the time that I was a student at Washington. I do feel a little bit of guilt for not bringing it up, but at the same time, I understand that it is not my burden. There's no student's burden to repair a broken school system. And I do say that, but I feel a responsibility because I want Wachusett to be better. I want Wachusett to thrive for all students. And I don't want anyone to feel excluded in this community. And I really think that Wachusett needs to be doing a lot better. I only had one Black teacher in my time at Wachusett, and I go to college, HBCU, and it's all Black teachers or Black professors and Black students around me, and it's something that I didn't realize how much I need to receive that perspective and to receive that sort of affirmation. For me as a Black student, but for a white student who doesn't experience any other viewpoints or any other perspectives, something that really teaches them, gives them a full and all-encompassing education that they need to be successful in the world, to be empathetic human beings, period. Not just good students with a good education, but good human beings with a better understanding of reality and of humanity. And again, it pains me that it takes hearing stories of pain in order for some sort of realization to come. But I don't know how else it would have come. And like so many others have said, change needs to happen now or never. I don't like leaving the option of never on the table. So I would really, really appreciate if something were done by this district, like as soon as we can, to address the needs, the issues that this community faces. So I guess that's really all that I have to say. But thank you all again for listening, and thank you, Mr. Mills, for allowing me to speak.
All right, Rihanna Leas, thank you, DJ. Rihanna Leah, do you have anything else to report?
No, that's all we have. Thank you.
So I thank our student representatives for their service this year. Again, I wish Rihanna the best as she heads off, hopefully off to college and not locally to college. And but yeah, I don't think you're joining us next year, but thank you again for your service as well. And we hope to see you both in the high school.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Thank you.
I'd like to move us into the superintendent's report, and then if people want to address some of the students' representatives' comments, they can do that while we'll go around the table under the superintendent's report, just to move us along. I'll turn the floor over to Superintendent McCall for things he wishes to highlight in his report. Then I'm going to turn it over to recognize first Member Lavoie to speak to evaluation, and then Member Dennis to frame financial statements, and then we'll go around the table and they'll get their own turn for their own comments as well. So Daryl.
Thank you, Ken. So first and foremost, I'm just going back. Thank you to the committee members and you, Ken, for sitting on our committee and being a part of the educational system here in Wachusett. It's greatly appreciated. It's been good to work with all of you. I've appreciated the candor. I've appreciated the support. I've appreciated the questioning. Everything that comes along with being a school committee member. And I think this is a no frills position for a school committee. People put a lot of hours in. It's a large committee. It's a time commitment, and I know many of you, when you speak with me, just understand how long the hours are associated with this. And I wanted to let you all know that I appreciate that. Want to talk, just briefly about, some of the items that have been brought up this evening. First and foremost, when, again, I think, Ken, you said it well, the passion, I think the pain, the feelings that all the students shared with us this evening, are ones that I feel. This is a tough situation for the entire country right now, and I think there's that saying, think globally, act locally. So what I'm admiring about this entire situation is that people are compassionate and they're passionate about what they're trying to do. We're as a school district, we don't condone violence. We don't support anything that isn't about making change, but doing so in a way that is, peaceful but straightforward. And again, we want to ensure that we're supporting change, and ultimately we all need to do a better job at that. I can tell you, I did the letter that was sent out last week to families. Typically, I send letters out, and they just pretty much always just go out to families. And again, that letter is something that I felt was necessary to go out as the school district leader, which is what I said in the message, as well as some of the things that I'm dealing with as a white male. In this situation, in terms of what my responsibilities are. And I think that's what people have to understand. We do have responsibilities. I can tell you, I had mixed responses to that letter. I had, emails that were somewhat threatening from some people. And, I had emails from people who said they cried when they read it because they want change to happen. So it really ran the gamut in terms of the responses, and that just tells you how challenging an issue I think this is. DJ, I got to spend 2 years with DJ on the school committee. I think many of you, did as well. And it's racism is something that we've lived with, in this country for over 400 years. It's still here. It's still alive. It's still something that we don't deal well with. And, from, my vantage point, and again, one of the things I pointed out in the letter is that, this is something that's been, in my mind for a while now. And, in order for us to really start to address these issues, I really feel as though it's pertinent for us and really important for us to focus on making sure that we understand what our unconscious biases are, which is why, we're reading that book with the building principles and looking at how we can have a better understanding of, our blind spots. I think someone, a couple of people mentioned, those terms. That's exactly what this is about. And, for us as a school district, we do need to do a better job. We do need to be able to support all students. It's not just the 86% Caucasian. It's all students. And that's what we have to do in the world globally. So, when I taught in Amherst in a multicultural, multinational school for 6 years, and it was probably one of my more diverse places I'd ever taught in, and it gives you a very different perspective. And I think one of the things we have to do a better job at is looking at the fact that even though we're not a necessarily diverse community, we still have to talk and teach about diversity, racial injustice, all the items that are coming to the forefront of discussions over the past couple of weeks. So again, I wanted to thank all of the students for their remarks. I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. And I want you to know that we're going to work hard at making this this district, this community, a place that's accepting, and again, this is something that every community, I believe, in the country is looking at right now, very, very closely, and it's necessary. It's been a long time coming. So, wanted to thank you all for those words. In reference to my report, there are a couple things that we ended up talking about at Business and Finance that I think Member Dennis will speak to a little bit this evening, but we will want to review our budget scenario situations. We're not at, as we heard Senator Warren's person talk about today, there's nothing that's going to be coming from the federal government anytime too soon. So we are forced to, take action in terms of what we need to do. And we have a Mass General Law that, ensures that we notify people who are non-professional status teachers by June 15th, of whether or not they're going to be coming back next year. So we have to take those steps and we have to let those people know in a timely manner. And that will happen by the end of this week, Friday, Monday at the latest. So again, this is, as Ken mentioned, this is probably one of the most challenging meetings, that we'll be participating in, because I think it's emotionally draining because of the challenges that we're all facing. So I think we have to think about this in a way where, okay, what can we do to move forward with a budget that supports what we've been trying to keep moving. And again, it's been 10 years since we had our last recession. We're back in one, and the gains that we've made, I'm hoping they aren't erased. So I'm just thinking if there's anything else. Ken, would you want me to start talking about the budget reduction scenario that I did at Business and Finance?
Well, I think you should highlight whatever you want to highlight from the report, so then the committee can go around. My goal was to have you, Matt, and Mike highlight the things that are in the report that we need to talk about, and then go around the table and have people talk about those things.
Okay.
So why don't you take your turn? It might make sense, Matt, for Mike to follow up on that just for the thread, and then have Matt talk about the evaluation, and then we'll discuss all of those things and en masse as going around the table.
And Ken, I have a couple of things that I want to present to the committee as well in terms of the rubric and the evaluation template. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, we'll do that. Let's just if it's okay with Matt, we'll just that Daryl and Mike just lay it out. Then we'll let you lay your thing out, Matt, and show what you need to show, and then we'll go around the table.
Perfect.
Okay.
So what I'll do is just bring your attention to the document that was sent to Business and Finance, and it was in the attachments, and it is it's basically the draft reduction update from June 4th, and that's the document that's broken down into a variety of tiers. And as I did talk through this with the committee a couple weeks ago when we spoke, and as we have been looking at the details associated with this, we spent a great deal of time meeting with the building principals, talking with small groups of principals, not grade level, but elementary, middle, high, also bringing individual principals together so that we could, really go through and look at the implications of what the reductions mean. And, where you hate to say this, but it's where the least amount of concern will be in reference to reductions. We don't want to reduce anyone. We don't want to take any person's job away at this time. But the options are really minimal once you get past tier 1. So as we started talking about some of the different things that we did with tier 1, our tier 1 reductions, were basically close to $3 million. Our goal originally was to try to reduce our budget to about a 1/12 budget, which is a budget that is the same as FY20. There'd be no increases, and that dollar amount is close to $4.3 million.
Daryl, I'm sorry, just to interrupt you for a moment. I think for people watching who don't have this packet in front of us, it'd be useful if this was being shared as you talk about this. What page are you on in your attachments?
I apologize. I have my whole document open.
Can you share it as you talk?
Sure. Yeah. So I just have to find it again.
Okay.
I'm trying. I apologize.
Okay, I believe it's page 84.
Thanks, Laura.
Let's see if I... Okay. Sorry, it was just hard because it was on the 84th page.
Right. Okay, so let me.
Do you want me to share it, Daryl?
You're right. I'm trying.
I can do it. That's fine. Hold on.
It's not working.
Okay, are people seeing
Yes.
the page 84? Yes, I hear.
It's, well, let's see.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, people are saying yes, that they're seeing what you're saying. Okay.
Okay.
So this is the first page of your thing, tier 1. Okay, go ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
Don't worry, Ken. So on the first page of the document, what we're basically showing is what the first tier 1 reduction would be. So tier 1 reductions are all of the items that we were trying to put it in that weren't necessarily associated with people, with actual positions, with the exception of the new positions that we had put into the budget for FY21. So there were reductions associated with textbooks, operations and maintenance, people services, our new positions. We have usage of excess and deficiency in this tier as well. We have carry forward money from school choice and also circuit breaker, contracted services. We have a transportation stabilization transfer and also summer school running remotely. There's a little bit of a savings there. So by the time you're done with tier 1, we're at about $2.9 million, a little above that. So as you kind of look down, we're still in need of about $1.3 million to get to that 1/12 number. Once you get, and Ken, if you can scroll to the next page.
Okay.
So on this page, we have our, again, this is tier 2, and the tier 2 reductions are done in a way that, again, we worked with admin over the past several weeks, really defining what these positions would end up looking like. So when you look at the tier 2 chart right there, we have the reductions broken down by position. And then if you scroll farther down to the bottom of that page, we have the reductions pre-K through 5 reductions. And that chart shows where the reductions would occur. So for example, ECC would reduce 5 paraprofessionals. NAQUAG would reduce 1 teacher, 3 paraprofessionals, and 0.5 other. And other could be anything from custodian to speech and language assistant to clerical. We had to kind of put everything into that position. So we have, pre-K through 5. Ken, if you could scroll down to the next page, page 3. We have our K-8 middle school reductions. And those are, again, base teacher, special ed teacher, para, ABA, and other. And one note on here is that there is a reduction of the strings teacher, which is a 0.8 position. And that would be an automatic reduction right here as well. Under the high school, we have 3 teachers in regular education, 1 teacher in special education, 2 paras, and 2 other positions. And those are positions, custodial and I believe a clerical, that haven't been filled yet. So when we're looking at a total number associated with these reductions, some of these include retirements, where we're not going to replace those positions, so those positions will be absorbed through attrition. You see a total number down below, and this is something that a member had asked for, what the breakdown would be. So this is the breakdown for the total number of teachers in regular ed, special ed, paraprofessionals, ABAs, and others. We're now at, if you go down to that bottom of that page on page 3, we're at about $1.6 million in terms of tier 2 reductions. It's about $300,000 over. So it's putting us in a position where we have a little wiggle room, a little leeway in terms of what we need to look at. If you can just scroll down to the next page. We have tier 3 reductions in the middle of that page, and tier 3 are more items. So we would reduce our special education tuition costs, really by looking at making some modifications to some of our support that we're trying to save on. Instructional support, operations and maintenance also. So there's another dollar amount savings there. Once we get to the next 2 pages, tier 4 and tier 5, the next couple of pages, excuse me. That's really the next kind of area where if we're looking at what a possible 20% reduction might be in state aid this year, which is even under what it was back in 2008 in terms of the percentage amount, we're actually looking at massive reductions across the board. So on the bottom of page, or in the middle of page 7, Ken, you'll note that by the time we get through tier 5, the total running reduction is almost $10.5 million. So as we have kind of gone through this process and talked to business and finance about this, we've been as kind of detailed as possible in terms of looking at this. We will have non-professional status teachers that we do know that we're not going to be able to hold on to. In tier, I believe in tier 1, or excuse me, tier 2, we have about 13 non-professional status teachers. In tier 4 and tier 5, we have 24, and then 15. So in total, it's about 52 non-professional status teachers. That's a huge number, and it's unfortunate. And this is something that I don't believe any one of us ever would have thought we would be dealing with even 4 or 5 months ago. So until there are funds that are established at the state level through federal funds, we have to take the necessary steps in order to ensure that we're able to continue to operate this school system on a 1/12 budget through the year. Ultimately, if it's through December and the commissioner comes in and sets a budget, that's another way for it to work. But again, we're looking at taking these steps in order to ensure that we have the funds to remain viable, in September. We've had many conversations as well about, some of the costs that we don't even know about that will be coming down the road. I believe Member Ottmeyer brought that up at our meeting at Business and Finance. We're not sure what those costs are going to be, but they could be extensive. And we're going to have to look at how that might play out. So again, this is our, this is really what our next steps are in reference to what our reductions would be around pink slipping people.
All right, Member Dennis, you want to have anything else add to briefly frame the conversation? Of course, we'll have a lot of motions downstream.
I do. Thank you, Ken and Daryl. Very quickly though, first, I as I think one of the first committee members to speak after what we've heard during public session and the student representatives. Just wanted to address those students very quickly by saying it took a tremendous amount of courage to speak out today. You've opened our eyes, and to quote Rihanna, we need to do better, and I sincerely hope that we will. Turning to business and finance, Ken, as you mentioned, there are several motions on the agenda today, and I want to, and there's a lot of information that Daryl just presented, and I want to try to put some of that information in context for all of us and for those who may be watching. The Business and Finance Committee meeting has been meeting and discussing almost exclusively contingency planning for fiscal year 21 for the past 2 to 2.5 months. And as we talk about plans, I think we've tried to talk about it in having 3 main components to having a plan. First is identifying the size of the problem. Second is identifying how do we close the gaps, and I'm going to refer to those as mitigations and reductions. And you heard a little bit about that tonight. And then the third is the timeline and understanding what is our timeline, what is our calendar, because that is crucial to the decisions that need to be made between now and when school starts for 2020-21. In terms of the size of the problem, I think that the administration now is modeling, anywhere from a $4 million to a $10 million impact. Quite frankly, we don't know any more now than we knew 2.5 months ago in terms of whether it's closer to the lower end or the higher end. Other than whenever we seem to get news, it tends to be a bit worse than the last news that we received. So, the higher end is probably just slightly higher probable than the lower end. In terms of mitigations and reductions that Daryl has laid out, let's talk about mitigations because a lot of that relates to the motions that are on the agenda today. In a typical year, we will run through the budget with our revenues and expenses. Usually we'll have some type of fund balance, and any dollars that are associated in that fund balance could be made and certified as part of our E&D. In an attempt to be creative and to be able to leverage funds that are not being expended this year, there are a number of instances where charges are going to be reversed out of revolving accounts and into general fund expenses, allowing us to build up our revolving accounts that we can then carry forward, that allows us to be able to use those revolving accounts, those funds in those revolving accounts for next year. There are 3, I think, primary revolving accounts: our circuit breaker, school choice, and transportation stabilization. And the plan that I think is creative and makes a lot of sense, not only for our district but for many districts, is to run our balance, to down and to leverage to the extent that we can within the rules. To use that model. So rather than roll it into E&D for next year and have it recertified and wait for that process to happen, we're looking to move that around in a way that allows us to leverage those funds for next year. And that is probably somewhere in the ballpark of about $1 million right now. There's other mitigations that are underway, negotiations with collective bargaining units. There's been some discussions around fees, as there have been some impacts in the tiered model on middle school athletics, potentially high school athletics. There's also a motion on the table for E&D use for next year. By the way, the motions that are on that regard transfers were recommendation from Business Finances was unanimous that they'd be accepted in school committee. Probably doesn't surprise you. For E&D, a little bit of a different story. With E&D, the motion to access E&D for next year for the sum of $450,000 failed to be recommended by the Business and Finance Committee by a vote of 2 to 1. So it failed for lack of a majority. I think for the dissenting opinions, or I guess with dissenting opinions, but some of the concerns were really twofold. One, this is a prudent use of our funds for next year, and 2, are some operational concerns about how we do that and what the budget implications are. And we can take that up take up that discussion as the motion comes up. But the last is timeline and calendar. And, you know, again, we've have continued to look to the administration to help us in business finance and help us in the full school committee understand what are those threshold moments in time when decisions need to be taken. You know, we know some of them. We know that threshold decisions need to be taken by June 15th as it regards non-professional status teachers. We know that there's a threshold of July 1st, which is when, without an approved budget by the towns, we would go into 1/12 budget. We know that we have, you know, we're going to be opening school, or at least attempting to re-engage in school at the end of August. But there are several intervening things and factors that need to happen before then. And one of the things that we want to make sure of is that when we're faced with a tough choice of making decisions about what's the best, worst decision, we don't want to fall into the worst decision. And to me, that would be where we go into the school year at a certain staffing level and certain resource level and find for one reason or another that we need to pull back once we're in flight. So it's a very important to me, and I hope to other members, for us to continue to work with the administration to understand what those different timeline triggers are as we plan forward, and to understand, you know, too, the intersection of what reopening looks like, and at what point do we need to start factoring in the cost for reopening into our budget, which we haven't done yet, and you know, and understand what resource shifting might need to happen to accommodate that. You know, again, this is not a situation where, you know, on one hand, we may have hopefully some specific guidance from DESE, but we need time to react. And, you know, the district will need to be planning for what reopening can look like, so that valuable time as we start to approach the beginning of the year is not done in a scramble in reacting to what comes out of DESE. So that too is a lot of information. Hopefully we've framed some of the motions, or I framed some of the motions for you, and you know, look forward to continuing the dialogue. Thank you.
So as I said, before we go around the table, another timeline thing, Mike mentions timeline, is superintendent's evaluation. We're way behind on that, so I want to make sure that Member Lavoie has a chance to start framing our conversation right now about how that's going to look, and then we can go around the table. So Matt, are you able to share what you need to share?
I should be able to, Ken. Let me see if I can. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So first and foremost, I want to thank the members of the subcommittee, Member Michalowski, Member Weeks, and Member Mills. I know that the subcommittee has really put a lot into making this an easy process for everybody on the committee to complete the evaluation. And I have to thank Barry Sklar as well, who has put together a lot of what you're going to see. So I'm going to make this brief, make it quick. So tomorrow, Rebecca is going to distribute with the members of this committee Dr. McCall's evaluation narrative and his evidence for that evaluation. And what you're going to get is a document. This is the document, and it defines the actual standards of what we will evaluate Dr. McCall on. So you're going to see these standards right here. And right within this document, there are a couple of links, one to the online evaluation questionnaire and one to the evaluation rubric. So I'll just kind of come to the rubric first. So when you look at those standards, they're going to align to each of these elements within that rubric. Real important, because as you go through the evaluation, which I'm going to open up right now, it's going to notice that it's yourself. You'll hit next here, and as you go through this evaluation, The very nice thing about this is each of these standards and what it means to meet the criteria is defined right in each of these buckets of unsatisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, exemplary. So you'll pay close attention to what is defined here in each of these buckets and align that with Dr. McCall's narrative and evidence, and then be able to rate that and then move on to the next element. And at the end of each of those elements, you'll have the ability to put your answers. And this will just guide you right through the completion process. A couple of key points of next steps. Tomorrow, Rebecca will distribute this. The hope is that everybody completes this as quickly as possible, but take your time. Do it in a way that is useful because this will be compiled where your individual evaluation will be part of the official file. Ken will put together a composite evaluation, but as a subcommittee, we'll need to compile some of those results for him. So you'll get this tomorrow, and the due date will be Monday. So having the full week and the weekend to do that. The last thing I'll say is I want to thank the members that are departing this committee. You probably, unless you do get written in, which could happen, you probably won't be there when we vote on Ken's on the narrative that Ken has written. But this is certainly your opportunity to put together a nice evaluation if this is in fact your final meeting within the committee. So that's all I have for you.
All right, thanks, Matt. It was important we got that in because it's a very timely thing that we need to do as a committee before we become a different committee soon. So what I want to do now, I don't have my little cheat sheet here, but I'll call up the roll. So I want to go around the table and give people an opportunity to talk. I'm going to yammer a second before I call Melissa first. We'll go alphabetical. I ask people to speak their mind, but be succinct and be ready so we can get to all of the 9 motions we have to go through. All right, so Member Ayala, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi. First, I just wanted to, of course, thank the students that spoke out in the beginning of the meeting. I applaud them for coming forward and bringing racism up that has happened to them in the past. And I just can honestly say I hear you loud and clear. For someone that grew up in a very diverse family, I lived through it through others' eyes is the best way I can say it. So I totally get it. I totally have seen it. I wish I were older back then to be able to have helped who I've seen have such difficulty. It's just heartbreaking to hear what they had to say. I think that's really all I have for right now. And thank you. I want to thank the committee for everything that they do, because I know this is my my one and only year for now of serving. But I hope to come back when my 3-year-old is older and I have more time. So thank you for that. And that's all I have right now.
All right, thank you for your service, Melissa. Member Brown?
Hi. Boy, this is my last meeting. This is one emotional meeting. First, I want to say thanks and say how proud I am for all the students that did speak out tonight, that it does take courage to do that. I also want to support Dr. McCall's letter to the community. I thought it was well put and definitely needed to be put out. To ask a question in regarding the non-professional status of the 52, are we looking at pink slipping 52 of those? Are we looking at like the worst case scenario going forward?
So Ken, do you mind if I answer? Okay. So Scott, yeah, so we have to look at it in that manner because we have an obligation associated with MGL with June 15th. So if we don't notify them prior to that time, it's a different situation for us. So yes, we have to do that. I mean, if Brookline pink slipped over 300 people a week and a half ago, and I know other communities are in a very similar situation to us that we're kind of going through. So yeah, it would be all 52.
Okay, and if for some reason funding is not as bad as we think on Tier 5, we can bring some of those people back in the fall?
Definitely. And I think that's one of the issues that we're looking at is depending upon when this, if funds come our way and we have the capacity to then bring people back on board, we will do so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Member Dennis, for your own comments. Thank you again, Scott, for your service. We know where you live, Dorichin, though you know that.
No, I think I covered it. I'm good for right now. Thank you.
Okay. Member Godbout, or is Steve at the meeting? And it's Steve's last meeting with us. Don't see Steve on the list. Member Gustafson? Lily, are you there?
Yeah, yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
If you can't, just raise your hand and I'll go back to my phone because that's also logged in if I run into problems. Okay, I'm trying to think. This is a really hard day, I have to say. I think my heart hurts for our district just hearing all of our students' experiences. I was going to initially say thank you to the superintendent for his statement because I did tell him that earlier in the week. I was quite impressed by that statement and that we're being proactive in this regard and really trying to talk about these issues. I was hoping it would have been put on the website so the whole community could have seen it at the same time that all of us parents saw it. So that was my one comment on that. But I do want to, in response to the students, just say thank you to them for sharing their stories. We have really amazing students. I'm saddened by their experiences. This is actually a topic I've dealt with quite a bit in my own life and experience. I used to teach students how to think about some of these issues. So it saddens me that so much of that is going on, but I hope that we'll be able to continue the discussion moving forward and not just leave it here this weekend. And I hope that our community will join us in that effort. I know not everyone is supportive of that path, but I wanted to voice at least my support for that direction. And I do know that there have been some programs in the district that have started to address some of these things. So I know that the middle school at Mount View, there was an initiative through the Celtics organization that the Playbook Initiative that we were fortunate to have, I think, about 50 students involved with, and they worked with students in Worcester, and it got cut short by the COVID, but they did start talking about some of these issues, and the idea was then they would bring back some of those conversations to other students at their school as leaders. So there are some pockets of things going on to start conversations, and I hope they continue. The other things I had to say are about the budget, which I hate to say at this point, but I will. I'm on the Business and Finance Committee, so I've been thinking about them for a while. I won't go into detail. I have one note that I'm sure we will get to later in the discussion, and perhaps Heidi will have something to say. But in the report and at Business and Finance, the one disappointment I have is that thus far we're not able to consider any negotiations with the union because they're waiting for the federal funds. Apparently, that's what we were told. And to me, that's a little bit disappointing because there's a lot of things that we could do with that $2 million that would save a lot of positions theoretically. And now I don't know if that perspective will change, but that was relayed that we weren't discussing those as of Business and Finance on Thursday because obviously you need both sides to be willing to discuss that. So I hope perhaps with the new federal information that those discussions can continue. I had a question for the administration about if we are in a position where we can look to restoring funds, if different funds become available or things in our budget as it is, we end up with more funds left over than we thought. If there is a plan and process for restoring items in terms of priorities for which ones you will restore first, or if you have a plan for that, because I think that's equally as important. You know, for example, the counselors that we were going to add that I think may be essential when we come back, is that something we could look at adding before, you know, before certain other positions. And I don't know what your thoughts are, but I'd like to know that you have a plan in mind for restoring positions if we have the opportunity to do so. And my last thought was about, there was a discussion of the extended school year and summer programs. And I had some thoughts from CPAC on that, which I'll save for later. But I know that's changing because there were new guidelines that just came out, I think yesterday or today. So, so I will save that for a later discussion, but those are my thoughts for now. I just hope we continue the discussions that are ongoing, and I hope that the federal funds will come through, but you know, obviously I'm not optimistic that they will come through before the school year starts. And I think we need to be mindful of that. And I hope that everyone in our community, including our teachers, our staff, everyone is willing to pursue every option we have to, you know, try to not reduce this as much as we are having to right now. And I wanted to also thank Dan and his team and all the administrators who've been working very hard on trying to put those pieces together. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Darrell, I think there's a question there about the restoring.
Yeah,
restoring pieces. Yes.
Right. So, you know, right now, as we literally just completed this, you know, we're going to come back to it now, and we're going to be looking at what the restoration process would be in terms of, you know, and again, that's going to be, it's going to look very bottom up if you think about it that way. So
that's fine.
Okay.
I really was curious, since a couple people had actually asked me as well since Thursday when I reported on the budget and finance meeting. You know, if we were to see additional funds through some process, will that go toward restoring positions, or will it go toward restoring, you know, like the $400,000 you took out of the textbook line, for example? They were hoping it would go toward positions or other priorities. So I think just once we get through this week, that may be equally important to have a plan for that. Thank you.
Okay, Member Haber.
I had a question about restoration as well, very similar to Leah, so I will let that go. Do we have, I know obviously we're waiting for funding from everywhere and no one has a budget, but there's teachers and paras and everyone else in the district who wants a timeline. So do we have any idea of a timeline on what they're looking at?
You know, in all honesty, in terms of, you know, one of the ways that we're looking at this, you know, we're all kind of in, you know, a state of flux in terms of what the timeline is. You know, we do have the mandated timeframes associated with our June 15th time for non-professional status teachers, but all the other ones are pretty open in terms of timelines for that. So we have already identified, you know, specific positions that we would take care of in reference to letting them know whether or not they would be coming back. But again, we don't want to do that too early, because at the same time, we're not sure when all this will kind of play out.
Okay, so if there's anything else, Sherry, or okay, so Member Haynes.
Thanks. I too am very grateful for the students who spoke up tonight. Thank you for that. And I'm grateful for Darrell's letter that he sent out. Grateful for that as well. It's well said. And there's so much we could say about that. So much has been said tonight. I'll simply say we have a lot of work ahead of us to do. To hear those stories, we have a lot of work to do. And I am confident that the people on this committee are ready to it. I'm just looking at the reactions as I heard those letters. I think we're ready. I think we just need to do it, and not just, as was said, dismiss it after this week. With the budget stuff, Mike was correct. He talking about the E&D funds, and I don't disagree with him. I agree with everything he said. The point that I would say with that money, as far as weighing whether to use it or not, my feeling was to actually make that a part of our budget, simply because trying to save jobs, and that's really what it comes down to. This coming year is going to be brutal, and anything that we can do to help our kids, which in this case, in my thinking, is trying to save jobs, is worth trying to do. So that was my take on it. But absolutely, the other side is valid as well. So that's a tough one. The question marks about what is going to be the cost for reopening. The state projects at the end of this month they will have some rough draft on what the guidelines will be for reopening the buildings. I don't know if it's actually going to come, but they're telling us that maybe at the end of this month they'll at least have a rough draft on that. As far as state money goes, we don't know what Baker will open up in terms of the rainy day fund. And as far as federal funds go, that is a very large question mark. I appreciate the efforts by our representatives, but as we know, it has to go through the White House. And unless someone on this committee is personal friends with Kid Rock and can ask him to go to the White House and lobby, I would say our chances are questionable at best on getting any help from them. So that's kind of how I see the financial picture. I think that's about all I got. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Member Imber, Bob, are you there? Bob, are you with us? We'll come back to Bob. Oh, there you go, Bob. All right, yep.
All right. So I really appreciate the student comments, and they were heartfelt and difficult, I'm sure. And if anything, we need to hear from more folk. And I know this has been an item that's been on the management agenda, and it clearly is a problem for the district. And we need to continue to deal with it. I really appreciate Member Brown's comments about the pink slipping and that we have to make those consequences known to educators, to our legislators, because I don't think they understand the impact. They haven't thought it through. And that's both on the state, but especially on the federal level. And then, lastly, Leah's comments having to do with negotiations. I'm wondering if there's a way to make those negotiations conditional, so that they understand if this, then that, and that there may be ways to sort of get support with the unions. If they understand that depending upon what happens with state and federal funds, we have a plan, and the intent is to try to be supportive. On the other hand, they understand that there may be needs to give up on a number of things so that they can be helpful to the district and the kids especially, and even to their fellow union members. And that's it. Thanks.
All right, Member Kirschenbaum.
Hi, thank you for the time to speak. My heart aches tonight. I appreciate all the students who spoke out or wrote out their hearts and their experiences. And prior to this meeting, I was concerned with some of the things that we were hearing out in the community about recent events and some of the pushback that I was hearing from outside forces. And I felt my heart was feeling like what a missed opportunity that we don't have our students in-house, in school, to help them through this very troubling time, to have them share their concerns, their thoughts, their emotions, and take it outside of their heads so that they could kind of make sense out of it. That's what good education does. It allows for the free thoughts and flow of information, and we missed that because we are so isolated. We don't have our kids in classes. But the things that were said tonight by our students make me wonder if that free flow of information and thought would have happened had they been in classes. It's clear to me tonight that there are many who would ask for our help in looking at curriculum, adding diversity, adding representation of diversity to our student, not our student body, but our staffing community. That people need to see reflections, good reflections, role models of who they are in the adults that are around them. And I just hope that when time comes to restore ourselves back into schools, when we have time to restore our staffing levels to where they need to be, where they should be, that we remember these calls for change and act. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Lavoie.
All right. A couple of points that I want to address. I'm definitely concerned that we have not considered or have factored in the cost for reopening into a budget at all thus far. I think that that's concerning because reopening is probably something on the horizon, and we should be thinking, and we shouldn't be waiting. The other thing that I'm going to say, and I'm going to be very, very candid about this, is I don't believe any teacher should be pink slipped. I believe the kids need teachers more than ever right now. I think we're hearing that with everything going on in the world. I think as a school committee member, it's our responsibility to ask our administration to do more about revenue. There are streams of revenue. We have a phase 2 opening up in the state that allows for youth to practice. You have fields at the high school that could be leased out to gain revenue. There's an abundance of alumni from the Wachusett Regional High School that could be reached out for donations. There's a community of businesses that could be reached out to support. Education impacts the entire community, and generations are going to suffer because of the lack of education right now. And now to think about taking out teachers is the last thing that I would ever even talk about right now. It is disheartening to even hear that people are already throwing in the towel and saying when and if we can bring them back. It's our responsibility to advocate and continue to push administration to advocate for more money from the community, build those relationships. And I know in the past, administration has said they're not comfortable doing that. Well, guess what? We heard from students today that spend there every day not comfortable. And it's our responsibility to make life better for them. And that's all I'm going to say.
All right, so Member Longaleo.
Thank you. So I want to thank the students for sharing their stories. I really appreciate your willingness to talk openly about these painful experiences and your courage in coming forward. I've heard some say that because our school has a large majority of white students that we don't need to address the issue of race, but I think your words are very clear evidence that we do, and I hope that people will hear you with an open mind. So thank you. And thank you also, Daryl, for your statement. I'm glad to hear that you've gotten support from some members of our community, and I'm sorry to hear that you've had such profoundly negative and nasty comments as well. It's one thing for people to disagree, but it should always be done respectfully and civilly. That's what we teach in school, and that's what adults should model. And I am, especially as a member of the Business and Finance Subcommittee, where we've been talking about these things for a while, I am just sick at heart about the prospect of layoffs and other cuts to our budget. As I mentioned, I do hope that our federal legislators will put everything else aside and just focus on getting the funding legislation done. Just get it done. I agree with Member Imber that we should encourage the unions to engage in negotiations that take into account different scenarios, if then that, as he said. That's a good idea. And if there is money to be found in our community, as Member Lavoie suggests, I'm all for seeking it out. When we get to the point where we have motions on various budget issues, I have a couple ideas, but I will hold those ideas until that point. Thank you.
Member Michalowski.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so I echo everyone's comments about the gratitude that I feel for students that were willing to share their personal experiences in our schools, and the sadness that you feel for any student that is struggling with, having feeling as if they're alone and they don't have people that can support them. So that I do wish in the future, whether I'm back on the committee or not, that they, this is something that the committee will dig into through education subcommittee, and that the district leadership will look into with the teachers and the school administrators to make sure that it is a priority. As I've listened to folks, I do, many of the comments that I would have made about the budget have been stated by some. Couple things I do want to reinforce. One is that I had written down that I did hope that there was a way to negotiate in, I don't mean better faith, but in good faith with the union around structuring an agreement to save jobs, so that there could be a wage freeze to ensure protection for positions, and perhaps some sort of balanced reinstatement of wages and materials or supplies and new staff, assuming that we get money back. And I would hope that that would have been part of, sometimes one of the challenges I felt as a member of a large school committee is and I think I've said this to Daryl a number of times, I feel out of touch with the ins and outs of what's happening. And when there are monumental things that are happening in the district, it makes me uncomfortable to not really know whether or not that's been part of the conversation. I think that is it. The last thing that I would say to Daryl is that I do hope that you can lead by example with regard to wage freeze. I think that it would go a long way for your staff to commit to freezing your wages for fiscal year 21. And I think that though it might not be, the $5 million that we need, certainly wouldn't we be lucky if it were, I think that would be meaningful to staff. So I'm not sure if that's something that you've already expressed to them within your cabinet or through your own communications, but I would really strongly urge you to take a stance on that early so that you can be part of the solution to the problem.
All right. Ben, are you back? I know Member Mitchell had to step off. Call for a moment. We'll come back to him if he wishes. Member Otmar.
Yes, thank you. I, like many of my other colleagues, I just really want to express my kind of the awe and the gratitude I have for all the students that demonstrated the courage to speak out and to share the challenges, the frustrations, the hardships that they've had to endure. Clearly, we can do better, and absolutely we must do better. Sometimes it's hard to kind of think about where to begin with that. Certainly hearing the voices that kind of come up from the grassroots, as well as some things that may have to come down from the top. You kind of really two ways you can go about bringing about organizational change, kind of changing an organization's culture. In this case, the organization being our school district. And so kind of, I think there's kind of, we'll have to go at this kind of from two places, kind of working from the top, from us, from the administration down, and then also really amplifying and echoing those voices of our students that haven't been heard, that haven't been able to share their stories. And it's kind of, hopefully when those two meet in the middle, we'll find ourselves with a better district. Thank you.
Okay, Member Silva.
Okay, so let me see, where can I start? First of all, I was grateful that I had my camera off because I was crying in ocean. I want the students to know that I hear you and I felt your words. You are brave and you have the courage to share your experiences. I'm a proud alumnus of this district. I was the darkest skin color in my school. My first experience in a Massachusetts school was being picked on for my skin color. I was called chocolate milk, such a delicious drink, but it was said in the most despicable way. I hated it. But fortunately, my experience at Wachusett, even though it was majority white, students, teachers, neighbors, I had a very positive experience. I'm grateful to my teachers and administration for such experiences that I still live with and learn from. Unfortunately, my kids did not share the same experiences. They were bullied and experienced many micro and macro aggressions due to their religion and skin color. Administrators did not take it seriously. It was always brushed off. My kids lost faith in confiding in teachers about their experiences. In fact, many of you know that my daughter was spit on by her classmates during her eighth grade graduation. And administration did nothing. I was crying in ocean because as the student's testimony was being read, I was imagining all those days my daughter cried to sleep, tried hiding her unfounded shame of not being white. As a parent, not knowing this pain and not being able to help her, I have a multiracial family, and my daughter said to me once, "Because of you, Mom, I'm not white. I have had it hard because of you." Daryl, when another discrimination issue had come up a few years ago, instead of being supportive, you had suggested I look into other schools for my daughter, and Wachusett wasn't for her. I too read your letter, and I'm very happy that you have realized your white privilege, and I honestly hate that term, because as I have told you, many of my white teachers, friends, mentors are dear to my heart and are very open-minded and loving. But recognizing this issue is in the right direction. But as one of my African-American friends said, and I'm going to quote her because I think it just illustrates the frustration she has. I don't necessarily agree with how she said it, but it illustrates her frustration. She said, "We don't need some white Tom, Dick, and Harry to make some coined political correct phrases. We need action." Basically, being a bystander is no longer acceptable. 14 days for the letter to be sent out, this was far too late. I had presented 4 years ago about unconscious bias. To learn that it has taken this long to investigate this topic is very concerning. About 4 years ago, I had offered this district trainings by an organization I co-founded, Enjoying Good. It's dedicated to allowing the stories be told by the people who have experienced them, not by some organization that does a generic presentation and speaks on behalf of the minority groups. When I had offered these presentations, there was a lot of pushback. And as Linda mentioned, Daryl, you had told me the exact same thing that Linda mentioned, that this wasn't an issue at Wachusett because we don't have much diversity here. But with the help of some open-minded community members, principals, and our congressmen, thank God to Congressman McGovern, yes, who are all white, by the way, I was able to present to our school administrators. And we are blessed with having some open-minded principals who opened their schools to me so that I presented some of these issues and shared mine and my kids' stories. I have asked to be able to address our students, but I was never offered this opportunity for the fear of the community's reactions. I would like to address our school committee for a second. And in making this comment, please know that I take responsibility, that I have not voiced this before. When you are in a minority group, you have to pick and choose your battles. And not once was I ever asked that if a school committee meeting was being held on one of my religious holidays. If we don't set an example in the school committee that we understand diversity, how do we expect the rest of our schools to do so? And I'd like to let the students know that I want to give their voices more volume. I invite you to share their stories and offer comprehensive education through Enjoying Good and my TV show Perspectives. Daryl, I would like to work with you and work with having these students share their stories with all our administrators, principals, and students. It's the only way forward. The only way forward is education. And I don't know, but I could not sit and listen to those testimonies without crying. Thank you.
All right, Member Smith.
First, I'd like to thank Asima for sharing your experience. Thank you. I don't really know what to say except thank you for sharing that. Okay. I'd like to echo the appreciation for, for the many perspectives that were shared this evening by our students. Your voices matter. You can affect change. As you begin your journeys into adulthood, I encourage you to continue to speak up, and I encourage you to consider roles in our local government and to consider careers in education. Thank you for sharing pieces of yourselves with us. Second, I'd like to thank the members of the committee who will not be returning. It's been a pleasure learning from you and serving the Wachusett District with you. Third, I echo Member Lavoie's concerns about the about the cost of reopening. The DESE has released guidance on the safety equipment and PPE that is necessary for reopening, and I'm concerned about how we will pay for this. I'm also concerned about reductions in staffing. Looking at the guidelines from DESE, although they're written for as if we were going to open now, they're telling us that the classes will have to be smaller at 10 students. When we were listening to the tiered cuts today and earlier in Ed subcommittee about the class sizes, I wasn't sure if that was being taken into account. So creativity and collaboration will need to be utilized. Thinking that we will return to school the way that we left it is not prudent. We left with large classes, and I don't think we'll be returning in that setting. And to conclude, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Chair Ken Mills for his steadfast leadership over the last 4 years. You have served as an excellent example of a chair for a school committee, and you've led us with integrity. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christine, and thank you also for your service as vice chair. It's been fantastic. Next member is Member Weeks.
Hi, and thank you all. I also wrote down my comments tonight because I just needed to keep myself focused when I had my turn to speak. I wanted to thank Dr. McCall. We have implored you time and again to take bold leadership decisions through your tenure as superintendent. And through your message, you did just that, but I'm asking you to not stop there. I first implore you to direct your principals to do the same by addressing their particular communities for all grades K through 12. I myself was disappointed in seeing a regular push forward in my kids' grade 1 and 3 curriculum this final week of school, where there is a massive opportunity to even have a virtual teachable moment. My husband and myself faced our own white privilege last week when we had the opportunity to choose how, when, and what to tell our 2 sons about the murder of George Floyd and the systemic racism people of color face in our society. We got to choose. And as we made that choice, we were met with the flabbergasted eyes of an 8.5-year-old who said to us, "Wait, Martin Luther King Jr. stopped racism. That's what they taught me in school." We must stop whitewashing the curriculum. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. Martin Luther King Jr. marched to stop racism. And then we come to today. We must teach even our youngest students about scientists, mathematicians, and authors of color, as well as the struggle that people of color have been through from the start of our country to today. In echoing what our students said earlier, we must start hiring teachers, paraprofessionals, principals, and administrators of color to reflect not just the diversity of our district, but the diversity of our nation. As I've said in years past, we must consider school choice in the coming years to open our doors in our building to an even more diverse community. Hearing our students say tonight, it's now or never, it has to be now, and I implore the administration to continue their bold leadership skills, even in the face of truly seemingly unsurmountable odds. I thank you for my time tonight.
All right, Member Woodland.
Hi, all. My heart is pounding, I have to be honest. Asma, thank you. What I had something written, but what you had shared, is just something that skipped my generation. My dad, I won't go into too much. I come from a multi-race, a mixed race family, with a dad who often would say that he married my white mother so that his kids would be white. I grew up in a diverse suburb in New Jersey. And so when I moved up here, I was shocked at seeing the blind spots in Wachusett. So hearing the students' words tonight, I am not shocked to hear what they are saying. I am also not shocked that it seemingly once again is laid on the shoulders of the people who have borne these wounds to rip open their scars and share them again so that we can, what, ignore it again? It's a time as old as time. At any rate, I also see this as a few things where too many in our community see the exploration of diversity as a zero-sum game, that it dilutes something of our district's character. And that's not what teaching diversity is. And in a broader way, I think that this is the ramifications of such a STEM focus in education, where humanities are left by the wayside as something extra, as something other, as something that we don't really need because it doesn't really get jobs. And so here we are left with a bunch of platitudes about how we need to do better. And I do appreciate the words. They are important to say. Words matter. Words have meaning. They need to be stated. But in the end, it's the humanities where you are exploring perspectives of others, looking at how to use lenses in other ways to explore the unintended consequences of actions, how it ripples out. And today's humanities should be not just rehashing what the old white men have already said, but should be looking beyond that to seeing all of the perspectives that build what has come before us. So that's where I want to say, Daryl, I do very much appreciate the statement that you set out to the community. I did not realize it didn't go to students. I think that is one thing that should be rectified. But I was very glad to see that statement, and glad that you took an anti-racist stance. That was, I think, very powerful and something obviously our community needed to hear, because those blind spots still exist where they don't understand how to take perspectives of other communities, at any rate. I have two questions that are kind of ticky-tacky, I guess. One is about the question of E&D, and I don't know if this is better served for later, but it's a question about timelines, where if it's not used now, will it be certified again in time for when we start seeing the problems with the 1/12 cash flow? That was one timeline issue I wasn't quite clear on. If if we start seeing cash flow problems potentially in October, would we be able to see that money again in time if we don't use it for now, or for this motion now?
So, Linda, I can probably respond to that. And Dan, you can jump in if you like, or Mike. The E&D typically gets certified. Earliest would be January, maybe February. It's been that late a couple times. So, Dan, is that correct?
E&D can be, that's correct, but E&D can be certified as early as the middle of the fall. Typically, what the Department of Revenue does is they address the requests from all the municipalities, and then they address the regionals. There are two important tasks that we're about typically in the fall. One is getting the end of the year report done in September. Secondly, we could certainly address excess and deficiency right after that, and that would be a several-week process. We could have it done by November 1st, which would be aligned with where we think we're going to hit the road, hit the wall, I should say, with the cash flow.
Just a slight clarification, I think there's a requirement that we submit E&D for certification no later than, and I think that's the spirit of what Dan's saying, but no later than the end of October. So, it's one of these things. I think what he's saying is that if we're able to not bring it right up to the deadline, the sooner that we could submit it and have our end of closing activities completed, the sooner, in theory, it could be recertified and available.
Okay, I believe that is actually my only question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll have to have a more thorough discussion of that once we bring up the motion as well. Member Young.
Thanks. I know we're getting late in the evening. I'll try to make this quick. Thank you, everybody who has shared tonight. Asma, Linda, DJ, every other student that did. Thank you very much. It's been, educational, both personally and I believe both for the district and the group. So thanks. I did want to comment on a different aspect of the report tonight. In the report, it talks about some of the reopening stuff and the task force. I am a part of that task force. I'm on the health and safety subcommittee of that. And one of the big things that we looked at, we met separately over the weekend in my group, and it's predominantly doctors and nurses and myself, so I'm a little out of place. But the big thing that we got is, looking at the DESE guidance that came out last week, the PPE supplies that we need to look at, we need to order that now. We need to get on it. If there's some of that money from this year that we can spend on it, can we get that out there? We had a discussion in the group. There was, I believe, $150K mentioned in the DESE document that would be available to the districts. And to a person, everybody just laughed about it. It's woefully under the amount that we're going to need. So we do need to really look at how the budget interacts with what the reopening plan is going to be. And as we hash that out towards the end of the month in this task force, we really need to consider it. Additionally, something I haven't seen mentioned in any talks of the budget and the 1/12 budget that I know from previous 1/12 budgets we've had to look at pretty consistently is issuing a RAN, a revenue anticipation note, to cover that cash shortfall that we usually hit in October. I believe October is when we'll hit it this time, to and ensure that we're looking at any costs associated with issuing that RAN. It'll help us get past that, but it doesn't come free. So that's just something we need to consider. And Ken, for all your leadership over the last few years. Thanks a ton. You've done a great job. One of the most even-keeled, steady leaders, keeping this giant ship upright. You've done a really good job, so thank you very much. That's it.
Well, thank you, Adam. I think I'm going to try and make my last meeting really long tonight. Is this direction we're going, right? The two quick things off of Adam's, I guess I was going to pass, but one, we probably won't get to new business, but Triton Regional School District sent around a resolution that I'd like us to look at our next meeting. Who's over our next chair hopefully can consider that, about asking for unfunded mandates to be funded in terms of COVID related expenses. So hopefully we'll get to that. And I don't know if Dan wants to talk about the RAND. The RAND deals more with cash flow than it does with not being able to spend over the 1/12 limit. We used to have those when we had issues with actual cash flows because our towns only paid us less frequently than they do now. They pay us quarterly now. Dan, do you want to clarify if a RAND could or couldn't be useful with respect to the 1/12 issue?
Through the chair, it could be useful. I have had several conversations with Mr. Dunbar, treasurer. We spoke as recent as today about this, and he still feels that we are in a decent position not to go down that road. I will follow up again with him tomorrow, and we have Jim coming to our next Business and Finance subcommittee meeting in a week or so we'll talk further then.
Hey, Ken, can I just to, I think, try to clarify, I think when we talk about cash flow that a revenue anticipation note would address, it's basically like a small loan. Taking out a small loan to cover cash before we have the cash deposited into our bank is a little bit different than the 1/12 expenditure restriction. And so I think that's what you were intimating, and I just want to make that clear. When we are in 1/12 budget, a budget will be set by the commissioner, most likely equaling our level of funding from last year, potentially less any reduction in state revenue at that time. Whatever that number is, if you divide it by 12, we are restricted to spend that amount, with the exception of two things. With the exception of, if we underspend in 1 month, we can carry that forward and spend it in the following month. And we can add to that limit funds that we use from revolving accounts, as I understand it. So those are two separable but related questions. The question of cash flow, I think, relates to the timing in which, and it's at this day and age, it's certainly not unreasonable for us to be thinking about that, but the timing in which that we would be receiving payments from towns and potentially from the state.
Great. And going forward, so the next chair knows, not to emphasize as this is my last meeting as chair, that does require action of the school committee. So the school committee has to approve that the business manager can go out and solicit bids for a RAND. So we would have to vote on that. And then he can go out and do that for us. So we have a lot of motions. Eventually we're going to need one to extend the meeting. So I do want to start working through them. So our first asked for someone to make a motion to authorize the superintendent of schools to sign the memorandum of agreement between WRSD and WREA, amendment to memorandum of agreement COVID-19 closure.
So moved.
Moved by member Weeks. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded. So Dr. McCall, can you walk us through this motion?
Sure, I just have to open up my microphone. So again, this is a third amendment to the MOA that we have put together with the teachers union. The first part talks about our evaluation system, and this is something that districts are doing throughout the state, where we are basically saying that they'll receive the same ratings for 2019-20 as it did for 2018-19. in terms of professional teacher status teachers. For non-professional status teachers, they're going to be rated based upon their mid-year formative assessments. Stipends, we have agreed to a 10% payment of spring sport coaches. Again, that's for the preparation and the work that they did prior to everything beginning back in March. We talked about personal time accrual time. So as of May 1st, their time would be deducted as they typically would be, because in the prior MOAs, it was not that way. And then high school coverage, we are really looking at if there is coverage that has to occur during this time frame, it's 1/5 of a 1/900th pay for those teachers.
All right, we rather than go around the table, I just want to have people raise their hand in the chat. And any questions or comments on this motion?
Did we make the motion yet?
We did. It was made and seconded. Okay, so seeing none, we have to take a roll call vote since we are operating remotely. So we'll do that alphabetically. Member Ayala?
Yes.
Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
I don't think Godbout is at the meeting, Rebecca. Is that the case?
Steve's gone.
Okay. Gustafson?
Yes.
Haber?
Haber, yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Imber?
Imber, yes.
Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoy?
Lavoy, yes.
Longbalil?
Yes.
Michalowski?
Yes.
Mills, yes. Mitchell?
Yes.
Otmar?
Otmar, yes.
Silva?
Yes.
Smith?
Smith, yes.
Weeks?
Yes.
Woodland?
Yes.
And Young?
Yes.
All right, so that passes. The next item on the agenda is for someone to make a motion to authorize the superintendent of schools to sign the memorandum of agreement between WRSD and WREA 2020-2021 school year furlough day. Is there a maker of the motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Member Haber and seconded by Member Brown. So Superintendent, can you lead us through this?
Sure. So for this next MOA, this really comes back to what we've been working on with the union around furlough days. So if the way this basically reads is if the FY21 budget adopted by the towns is less than $99,518,865, the WREA agrees to the following. So what they would do is work one less day. They would work 182 days versus 183 days. They'll still have the opportunity to have no-cost PD equal to 6 hours that the furlough day would have provided. So it basically puts us in a situation where it will save the district about $235,000 in total.
All right. Member Brown, do you have any follow-up on that as Chair of Legal? You may not.
Yeah, I was on the meeting with Dr. McCall and the union leaders. We did ask for a lot of different cost savings to save jobs. They did agree with this one furlough for now. They kind of want to see what is coming down the pike, what the state is going to come up with money and everything like that. So that was very nice of the union to agree to that. It does save the district $200,000, which is roughly probably like 4 jobs if you look at the average. So it's all good.
All right. So somebody's typing fast.
Sorry.
No, it's
sorry.
okay.
Sorry.
It had to be Rebecca because she was typing really fast. So other people want to raise their hands in the chat? Member Michalowski?
I just wondered if somebody could speak to how they came up with the dollar figure that's cited in the MOA.
Daryl? Daryl, you're on mute.
Sorry, I couldn't get my bar to come back up to unmute myself. Yes, that's a good question, Amy. Sorry, I didn't speak to that. That dollar figure was the original dollar figure associated with the Tier 1 reduction when we put out our first 5-tier model, the draft 2.5 weeks ago. So that was the dollar amount. So what they're basically saying is we would want you to do all of these items in reference to non-personnel reductions before we would then make a decision to reduce that amount.
Thanks.
So are there other comments? And again, a budget is different than the budget being funded, right? So there are kind of two different questions about what budget is passed and and if there's a mechanism to fund that budget. All right, so I don't see any other. I'm sorry, Member Lavoie, do you have?
I just have a follow-up to Dr. McCall's answer there. Am I hearing this was if we do this, we'll do that? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, this is an if we do this, we'll do that. So if it gets to this point, we will, the teachers will move from 183 to 182.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, are there other comments about the motion on the floor? All right, seeing none, we'll move to a roll call vote again, alphabetically. So Member Ayala?
Ayala, yes.
Brown?
Brown, yes.
Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Godbout? I'm sorry, Godbout's not there. Gustafson?
Gustafson, yes.
Haber?
Haber, yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Timber?
Yes.
Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoie?
Lavoie, yes.
Long-Balil?
Yes.
Michalowski?
Yes.
Mills, yes. Mitchell? I'm sorry, Ben dropped off. Member Otmar?
Otmar, yes.
Silva?
Yes.
Smith?
Smith, yes.
Weeks?
Yes.
Woodland?
Yes.
And Young.
Yes.
All right, so the next item on our agenda is if someone wishes to make a motion to authorize the use of $450,000 of certified excess and deficiency funds from the excess and deficiency account as a funding source for the WRSD fiscal year 21 budget due to expected cuts in fiscal year 21 state education aid from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts due to the COVID-19 crisis.
So moved.
It's moved by Member Haynes. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Member Woodland.
Kirschenbaum.
Kirschenbaum, I'm sorry, I just saw it now. So it's been made and seconded. Daryl, can you and Dan walk us through? I think for me, I think it's still a little bit of fuzziness in how it's been presented about timing, implications. Definitely there's a conversation we have to have about pros and cons, but can you and Dan make us clearly understand process and implications, and then we can discuss pros and cons?
So there are two deadlines. The first deadline is to identify a sum of money for the FY21 budget prior to June 30 of 2020, regardless of the sum of money. In this case here, it's $450,000. If the committee chooses not to act on this evening, then the opportunity to use excess and deficiency at the start of the fiscal year is next until we have our FY20 E&D certified. And that would be probably, let's say, in November, December of 20. If the committee chooses at that time to use FY20 certified excess and deficiency dollars, it may, but it will need to follow the same process that we used a year ago when we looked to have $250,000 used for the field. We would need to inform the towns at that time of our desire to use a sum of money, let's just say it's $250, we would give them 45 days notice in which to respond, in which to react to that. And if they chose not to respond to that, then at that time, and let's just say it's December or January of 21, we could use the certified FY20 excess and deficiency for the FY21 budget. And we'd be looking to use these dollars here, as the motion states, as a revenue stream, similar to the use of Medicaid and interest income as well for the 21 budget.
So Daryl, do you have follow-up on that?
Yeah, I think Dan explained it well. In reference to what we're looking at is just having the capacity to tap into these funds at this time. Again, I think it would be nice to be able to. We've never had, and I'm just a question. I don't believe we've ever had our excess and deficiency certified earlier than maybe December or January. It's typically not early, but as Dan said. Once he gets his end of the year report done, he would get going on that. It would just be something that would, again, it's also turnaround time associated with the state. It's not just on us. So once we finish it and we submit, we then have to wait for the state to certify it.
So I see some hands, and I'll recognize that member just in a moment. Member Lavoie had a question, a clarification of what Dan said. He asked, is it by June 30th or by the end of June 30th? Mac, do you want to ask that question?
Yeah, Dan had said by June 30th. So is that, we meet on June 30th. So I'm trying to figure out, is it by the end of June 30th or by the end of June 29th?
It'd be June 30th. June 30th.
So the end of June 30th. So tonight is not the night that we necessarily have to take this motion up.
We'd like to, because this will help us to navigate the 21 budget and the various tiers that we're working on.
All right, I think Matt may have happened what happens to me all the time of clicking that stupid hang up button that's next to the mute button.
I did it.
That happens to me.
Sorry, first time today.
So Dan, can you quickly just repeat that, because it's really important.
So we'd like to have this resolved one way or the other this evening in preparation for July 1.
But this is also contingent upon the state reducing funds, which we don't know that they're reducing, correct?
That's correct. I mean, we've made an assumption that our state aid is going to be reduced approximately 20%. Which translates into approximately $6.2 million based upon the FY20 figures.
All right, so the hands are starting to go up. So Member Dennis and Member Michalowski, and then we'll open it back up.
Thank you, Ken. So, again, this motion, the motion to recommend the passage of this motion to the full school committee came up in Business Finance, and it failed the motion by a 2-1 vote. Just to give some background, right now our E&D is at approximately $960,000 after the transfer out for the field turf replacement that the committee authorized from last year is taken into account. We, by policy in Wachusett, have set a floor for the balance that we would carry, which is 1% of our operating budget. And where we are even today is less than 1%. We have certainly in the past have had years where we have built some type of reduction of E&D into the budget. In those years, oftentimes we were anticipating a carry forward that approximated the same amount that we were reducing the budget by. That is not going to be the case this year. Rather than carry forward funds from E&D into the next year, we're looking to bring those forward and use them as part of revolving accounts that I talked about before. As I see it, there are two issues for us to consider with this motion. And the first issue is it the right thing to do? And what I mean by that is this. I talked before about not wanting to find ourselves in our worst option. And to me, again, our worst option is to find ourselves in a situation where we start the year and we need to make resource or staff reductions in mid-flight. That has a tremendously detrimental impact to students and to kids. If you believe that there is at least a 50% chance that there can be some type of resurgence of this virus that results in us incurring expenses mid-year that have the downward impact of having 9C cuts mid-year, depleting our E&D, at least by half, up front, reduces our ability to adjust to that activity. And to give perspective, 50% chance means your guess is as good as mine. If you don't think that, then you would ask yourself, is this more than a 1-year problem? If this is a 2-year problem, then we've identified a number of different mitigations that we're attempting to look at for this year. And absolutely, I am hoping that, state funding comes through, federal funding comes through, and our impact is not as great as it could be and as we've discussed. But if you believe that this could be a 2-year problem, then when we start to look, when we find ourselves on June 8th, 2021, and we're having similar kinds of conversations, now we have even less money to draw down upon, where we're looking at additional cuts because our cost of living, potentially COLAs, our benefits and insurance have all increased. And now the problem has been compounded. I would rather us see us trying to fill this gap if we can by looking at our transportation settlement, for example, and looking at lowering the percentage by a very high degree to try to fund that gap, as opposed to drawing down on our rainy day fund for what is sure to be turbulent times ahead. That's the question of whether or not this is the right thing to do. The question...
Mike, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second for a point of order. Member Ottmar made a point of order motion to extend to 10:30, so that's a motion that Member Ottmar has made. Is there a second to the motion to extend till 10:30?
Second.
Second, Member Valong Balil. Let's quickly go through the votes. So Ayala?
Ayala, yes.
Brown?
Brown, yes.
Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Godbout's not here. Gustafson?
Yes.
Haber?
Haber, yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Imber?
Imber, yes.
Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoy?
Lavoy, yes.
Long Balil?
Yes.
Michalowski?
Yes.
Mills, yes. Mitchell? Don't think Ben's here. Ottmar?
Ottmar, yes.
Silva?
Yes.
Smith?
Smith, yes.
Weeks?
Yes.
Woodland?
Yes.
Young?
Yes.
Okay, that passes. So Mike, you have the floor again.
Sure. Just quickly on the second point, and it's how do we operationalize this? My understanding, we asked this question of business finance. We were seeking to get some clarification. My understanding from looking at the DESE site and also even reviewing our policy is that if it were the will of the committee that this is the right thing to do at this time, there's a question of whether or not we would need to have E&D identified as a revenue stream in our budget prior to going into 1/12 budget. And if that's the case, I believe, I would not claim to be the expert, but I believe we would need to pass a revised budget to specifically build E&D into the budget as a revenue stream, which is not on the table for tonight. So again, some issues that we've talked about from the last committee, and just some perspective, and I know that there'll be some other perspectives as well. Thank you.
Just from a process question from Mike's question, Dan or Daryl, can you answer his last question? I don't know the answer either about if it has to be built into the budget.
It is my understanding in speaking with the DESE that if the committee votes a sum of money prior to June 30 out of E&D, that can be used for the FY21 budget, independent of a revised budget.
So just, again, and I think that we want to make sure that if that's the case, and if that's the will of the committee, that we are very locked down on that process. Because if I go to the FAQ document that was released in mid-May by the DESE and is on their website, question, may the regional school committee approve an increase in the amount of E&D used in fiscal 21 budget? School committees that wish to supplement their budgets or account for decreased assessments or state aid due to COVID-19 may want to include or increase the amount of E&D in their proposed budgets. E&D, underlined for emphasis, must be included in the school committee's proposed fiscal 2021 budget, underscore for emphasis, prior to the setting of 1/12 budget, and underscore for emphasis, prior to member approval. So, again, that's, probably information that's been put out by the DESE in written form about 3 weeks ago. And we would just want to make sure that we're doing this the right way, if that's the will of the committee.
All right, Member Michalowski, then Gustafson, then Otmar.
Yeah, I had a quick question because I may have a follow-up question after listening. Is there any sense of when the transportation contract will be resettled? I mean, I think that it's just unfortunate that we have our backs against a wall to a degree, and there are just not even the unknowns of next year. I understand nobody knows that, but I think even within the circle of things that we loosely control, so the decision to reduce 75% to 50% or some percentage lower or not pay the transportation, I don't think we shouldn't pay, frankly, but that could offset this E&D utilization. I'm very uncomfortable with leaving such a small amount of excess and deficiency. I think that it leaves us really vulnerable. The other question I had for Dan or Daryl is, when, aside from turf field, was the last time that we used E&D, and the relative, I know that the past doesn't predict the future, but I'm just curious if how frequently it has come up in our past that we've had to use E&D. Those are my two questions.
So I'll take the second question first. The district used E&D approximately 2 years ago as a revenue stream, approximately $150,000 out of the FY19 budget, I believe. It was either 18 or 19. Secondly, with respect to the transportation contract, as the committee knows, there was a settlement presented, approximately 75% that would pay AA transportation. After last Thursday's Business and Finance Subcommittee meeting, I did reach out to Mr. Ernenwein, and we spoke briefly on Friday. And as he stated, he's not in a position yet to renegotiate because there were still several communities of the 13 that were part of that 75% settlement that had not either returned their signed contract or had made payments through the end of May. I did reach out to him again today. Unfortunately, we were not, we didn't connect. He's my first phone call Tuesday morning, and I'm hopeful that he and I can come to some agreement this week that the other communities that he was waiting on have signed their agreements and have also made payments through the end of May. At which point I know that he'll be willing to sit down and have a conversation, but that's still several days away.
Key Member Gustafson.
I have two questions. The first is related to what Dan just said, because I don't have my notes in front of me. Do we, if he were, I know we talked about in Business and Finance about a 50%-ish change there. If we are able to get him to consider that, do we have a dollar amount for that, for the difference between the 75 and the 50%?
So we were talking approximately $1.3 million, and of that, we were going to pick up $300,000. So 600. It's half of that. I'm trying to blank. I'm sorry.
So the $300,000 is the difference between the two, or that?
So the $300,000 would have been the savings on the 1.3 at 75%. If he agrees to, so we'd pick up another 150 thereabouts.
Now, Dan, isn't it true that if 25% of 1.3 million is 300,000 and change, that another 25% of 1.3 million would be another $300,000 and change?
Probably.
Total is $650,000.
So 325 is what we were assuming in part of the tiers, and another 325,000. I think the answer to your question, Malia.
So it would be $325,000 additional that we would get if he considers the 50%. Thank you. I just didn't have my math in front of me. We've had that discussion before. So then my related question, which it's really a thought, it's not a question. If that's the case, I mean, I personally, I'm one of the no votes from Business and Finance because we didn't have enough information at the time about lots of things. I personally think that $450,000 is a scary amount to take half of our excess and deficiency. However, I think it may be financially prudent to take a smaller amount given our situation. You know, I don't have an exact amount in mind, but, you know, 250,000 maybe. And then knowing we can add more later because we have these other moving factors. That was my personal thought on the matter. I don't know a process for doing that, but that was my personal thought with these unknowns, with the transportation and with, you know, some other things that we hope might come to fruition, you know, down the line. You know, perhaps the union is willing to have some more discussions, or there's other financial things that come out differently than they are right now. I thought that was kind of the middle ground. That was my thinking, but that's what I will share. I don't know the process for doing that though, so.
I suppose the process could be to make a motion to amend the motion on the floor.
And I'm willing to hear the rest of the discussion, but that was my.
So, Member Otmar.
So my question really kind of does tie in a bit with Member Gustafson's in that, it was just something I'm still not entirely clear on, is that if this motion were to pass, are we required to take 450,000 out of excess and deficiency, or we're able to take 450,000 out of excess and deficiency, but we're not required to take that amount out? And so I think that's something that would kind of help clear up how people may or may not vote on this.
So you'd be voting $450,000 to remove from excess and deficiency as a funding source.
So I think just to clarify further, Ken, if I might, again, the ways for us to access excess and deficiency is, if we are intending to use it for next year, then it needs to be in the budget as a revenue source, which means we're using it. I mean, you know, you can decide as a practical matter to put money aside, freeze that line, but that's not the intention here, right? The intention is, if we're putting it in the budget, I think we're going to use it because we're trying to save, you know, we're trying to save jobs. I mean, that's the spirit behind it. It's just a question of whether this is the right time and these are the right circumstances. But so yes, you either build it into the budget, or you have a special motion if we were in next year that we were running to a deficit, or some special circumstances arose where we needed to access our funds, and we would need to do that once they're recertified if we were in next year.
I mean, I guess to kind of just to follow up, I guess so I'm clear. So like, if this passes and we say we're taking 450,000 out, and then tomorrow the bus transportation says, all right, yeah, we'll cut you slack at 50%. And so that's an extra 325. And so we look at this number and we say like, oh, well, we'll just take that 325 and put it back into excess and deficiency. So we're really only taking 125 out. Like, could you do that? Or would it be, you have to codify it as 450 and then we write a budget for it. And then tomorrow we get 350, 325 from the contract. So we have to rewrite our budget again.
So can I don't mind taking a stab at that. So I think that it's my understanding from my reading. Certainly, we'll defer to experts who know this better. But it's my understanding that if we vote to access excess and deficiency as a revenue source for next year, we need to build that into the budget prior to our budgets being set for 1/12 budget. I would decouple that a little bit from the transportation issue. I use that as an example, but I will also say that we have 1.3 million in access that we can roll over dollar for dollar next year. We're under no legal obligation to pay anything. Now, whether we believe as a committee that's the right thing to do is a topic perhaps for another day. But as time goes on, this is our decision about how we're using those funds and whether or not we think it's appropriate to make some form of readiness payment to the bus company for next year and what the amount of that payment should be. So I guess what I would hope that the committee should not feel that we're hamstrung by a lack of willingness for the vendor to negotiate with us so that we have certainty on it. I think that we for ourselves need to set some parameters around, what are we willing to do over a period of time, and let that drive it.
So I'm just a biochemist who sometimes calls names in alphabetical order, but my understanding, and I hope that Dan and Daryl can give the expert opinion on this, is that if we vote today to do this, we have the option to put it in the budget when we issue a new budget. Now, I understand what Mike's saying. I understand what the website says. I understand this is different than what that website says. My understanding is if we vote this in, we have the option to put it in the budget to defer loss in revenue sources in next year. And if we don't till it's recertified. Dan, Daryl, can you give us like 100% process of what this does or doesn't mean?
So what this means is if the committee does not vote on this evening, then we would negate the opportunity for the start of the fiscal year to use approximately $450,000 in excess deficiency. That would mean that we would have to identify either further cuts in the budget or, again, given the fact that the transportation matter is still unresolved, that we have no resolution with AA Transportation. I also want to point out that whatever we do with AA Transportation, that we would also do with our SPED provider as well, be it 50% or what have you. So if we pass on this opportunity this evening, or if we pass on the opportunity on June 30, because certainly by June 30, there will be resolution on the transportation matter that we could revisit next fall at the earliest, the use of excess and deficiency for the 21 budget using the process that I spoke about earlier.
So just to follow up on process, again, so you said what would happen if we don't do it. I guess my question is what would happen if we do vote for it? And I want to follow up on member Lavoie's question from way back when. Do we have to vote on June 30th to do this, or do you have to inform DOR or whomever by June 30th? Because that's a different thing, right? And I think that was the spirit of that question, and I'm still not quite so sure I know the answer to it.
So we would not need to inform DOR of this decision in terms of the vote. We just need to keep it documented. And June 30 would be the deadline. So we could vote June 30 if necessary.
Okay, so no other hands are up in the column. As chair, I would rule that if we vote on this motion now, this requires 15 positive votes, unless the superintendent or Dr. or Mr. D disagree with me, because this is a matter related to budget and use of E&D, which requires a 2/3 majority of the seats on the committee. So as such, it would require 15 votes in the affirmative.
Ken?
Yes.
This is Malia. I had a question. I had
Yeah.
my hand up.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
No, that's okay. I actually had two. The first is that, okay, from what, the question about whether or not we need to have this in writing, or whether we have to have a new budget actually physically passed to use this. Is that something, are we allowed to pass a motion with a contingency that it would only take effect if we can clarify that in writing? Because I do think, being on Business and Finance, that there is some urgency to deciding this question tonight versus the 30th, because it's in the tier 1. And if we don't have that reduction in the tier 1, that's more jobs we have to cut by next week or Friday, because of how the plan is structured. So I do think there's some urgency. While technically we could wait to notify DESE until the 30th, I think that's why Dan was hoping we would get this done tonight, one way or the other, because it does impact that. And then my follow-up question is that I'm a little torn, because if we do need to pass an actual revised budget, that's a much more complicated process, with a lot of unknowns, than if we can do this without that. So I wondered if it's possible to add a contingency statement of some sort.
So two things to that question. This is just my opinion as chair, not as a member. I think if I hear what they're saying about wanting it decided tonight, I would feel more comfortable if there was a contingency that we would consider a motion to postpone until a time definite when the information is had. That's an option. Of course, you have the option to make whatever amendment to the motion that you want that is valid. The other question, I'm just losing the thread. It's getting to be 10:14. I'm sorry, it might come back to me in a moment. Member Ayala, do you have another question?
Yes, please. So from my understanding, are these funds specifically already have a place if they're approved? Like, are they specifically going towards staff or transportation, or is it just going towards the budget in general?
It be used as a revenue stream, similar to the use of Medicaid, similar to the use of miscellaneous revenue.
Ken, this is Linda. I've actually been trying to type in the chat, and unfortunately my chat, I can't seem to type in it.
Okay.
So I'm sorry. I've been thinking along the same lines as Member Gustafson, that it would be helpful to have a contingency, or alternatively to vote. Could we vote for a smaller amount tonight? And then if we want to vote for more on the 30th, we could vote for more on the 30th. If the bus, the bus contract doesn't work out, something like that.
I mean, people can make a motion to change the motion on the floor to reduce the amount. In terms of, the future chair will have to decide about rules of order about having a motion that is similar in substance to a motion that we voted on the previous meeting. That might require a motion to reconsider. I'm just getting late on my in my brain at the moment for Robert's rules.
I guess my thought was that we could vote for the 250,000 that Member Gustafson suggested tonight, and then we could just vote to increase that if we needed to on the 30th. Is that something that would be in the realm of possibility?
I don't know. I think that's something I'd want to. I mean, what you can do tonight, yes, you can amend the motion. If we can bring a second motion to change the number, I'd rather have council weigh in on that than, or unless Mr. Dede or the superintendent have an opinion from their expertise. I'm not hearing that. Jumping in.
I'm not sure in terms of, revoting the motion at the second, at the June 30 meeting. No, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'll hold you for a moment if that's okay. Member Young?
Yeah. I mean, for me, this comes down to something just really simple. We're looking at tier 1 cuts right now, and we're looking at tier 2 cuts, which is people in the classroom when we're looking at opening up with reduced classroom sizes already. And it's going to be extremely difficult. So we've either got the option to do this and people, or not do this and cut more people. That's the only thing I'm looking at. Or we can do a smaller number and cut more people than are in the plan right now. The way I see it, if we do this now and then we get the transportation money, that means we can cut less people. That's it. I mean, we start at that tier 2 and we start adding stuff back in if we end up with more money. So, and then as we go up, then we can start adding back tier 1 if we get more revenue stream through CARES Act and other things. But we're going to get a lot more expenses this year as well that aren't even in a budget yet. So that's where I am.
All right, so I have Member Dennis and Member Lavoie, and then I'll go back and see where you're at with your question.
Thanks, Ken. So, I go back to, I think, the point that you made that if there is the entertainment of some contingency, whether that is seeing how things settle with transportation or understanding if there needs to be a corresponding budget move and having that firmed up, or if there's just simply a discomfort with the level, those to me are probably reasons to move this decision out to our next meeting at June 30th. And so I would offer the motion to defer to a time definite, which would be June 30th meeting.
So Member Dennis has offered a motion to the floor, has been seconded by Member Lavoie, which is to postpone to a time definite. We got this wrong once before. I'm going to really try not to hard to make a mistake in this meeting. So this is a motion that is going to make this appear on the June 30th agenda. So this is not a way to kill the motion. This is a way to just push the decision to a future motion. This requires a simple majority to vote. So right now, the question on the floor is the motion to postpone definitely to a time forward, as you might say, to June 30th. So if we get back to the main motion, we'll return to members Lavoie and Gustafson, who had comments on the original motion. Right now, I'll entertain questions on the motion on the floor.
So Ken, if I can just address that as the maker of the motion.
It's your motion, of course. Yep.
Thank you. So, again, if we move forward with this motion and not trying to just kick the can down the table, I think people appreciate what we're trying to do here, but it seems that we need resolution on 3 items. And so let's just be clear on what those are. Number 1, by June 30th, we should have some resolution or proposed resolution on the transportation settlement question. Number 2, there should be some resolution and extreme clarity on what we need to do procedurally if we want to be able to use these funds in 1/12 budget for next year and what those procedures should be. And then number 3 is perhaps based on 1 and 2, what is the level? If the administration believes it's still prudent at that point to move or draw down E&D, what is the level that they are comfortable in recommending based on those first 2 items? Thank you.
And item 2 is the one we really need, which we've been asking for a while, just to make sure we're clear about that. So are there other people who want to speak on the sub motion to postpone definitely or to a time forward? Member Haber.
I guess my question is, if we do this, then we're for that $450,000, are we assuming we're cutting more teaching staff of the non-professional teachers, which we're going to have to do by the 15th? So therefore, by the 30th, there's no option? Or is that $450,000 going to go towards a different cut that, yeah, I guess that's all my question. Where is that $450,000 going to show up in which further part of the tiers?
So I guess the question, just to frame it, if that's okay, I don't want to over-explain it, but the June 15th thing we're going to talk about, that's all the tiers, right? So it's not like we're only doing certain tiers by June 15th, and that's the only deadline that's June 15th is the non-professional status staff. But Daryl, I saw you had come off and on. Are you on for that question? I was just stalling.
No, I may. Again, I was thinking about just kind of looking at the 450 again. That would probably have to, we'd be looking at staff. We'd be looking at non-PTS as well as PTS. So it would be a mixture of both.
Ken, can I offer a clarification there? I think you've said it. I don't think what's coming across clear, and part of it is, and I think it's a great question, but part of it is not without having a timeline for what triggers what actions. It's hard to just think about this, right? But on June 15th, as Ken mentions, professional status teachers are going to be put on notice. And so when you talk about, are we just stuck in tier 1 or tier 2? I believe that is across all of the tiers, as Ken has mentioned. And so, that doesn't align with the dollar values in simply tier 1 or tier 2. And so that's what makes this a little bit confusing. The fact of the matter is that whatever those reductions are, whatever reductions that need to be made beyond simply going the 1/12 budget are decisions that are going to happen, I believe, later in the summer in terms of how exactly our staffing looks like when we have the total picture. So to make the statement that 425 is before June 15th, the timing factor there really is a misnomer. It's a non-factor.
Yeah, I would agree with that perspective. Just one thing to correct you, Mike. I think it was just a misstatement. You said it's non-professional staff. That would be June 15th. You said professional staff. I think it was just a 10-15 thing. Going to have a point of order from Member Weeks before we continue down the list. Member Weeks, you have a point of order?
Yeah, I would like to make a motion to extend the meeting to 11 p.m.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Member Long-Balil seconds it. Ayala?
Yes.
Brown?
Brown, yes.
Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson?
Yes.
Haber?
Haber, yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Imber?
Imber, yes.
Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoy?
Lavoy, no.
Long-Balil?
Yes.
Michalowski?
Yeah.
Mitchell? I'm sorry, Otmar?
Yes.
Silva?
No.
Mills, yes. Smith?
Smith, yes.
Weeks?
Yes.
Woodland?
Yes.
Young?
Yes.
The motion to extend passes. Go back to my list. Linda Woodland.
Sorry, I actually take back my question. It was answered. Thank you.
All right, Member Lavoy.
We want to make a motion to move the question.
All right, so we have a motion to make the question. Is there a second to the motion to move the question?
Second.
This is not debatable and requires a 2/3 majority, which is how many, Rebecca?
We have, sorry about that. We have 16 present. So it would be 11.
Yeah, 11. Okay.
Ken, I have a point of order. Can you just clarify which motion we're voting on? I think I know, but just in case.
So we are voting right now on Member Lavoy's motion, which is the primary motion to move the question, and the question that he's moving is to postpone to a time definite. And if this motion to call the question essentially passes, then we move to an immediate vote on the primary motion.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So Ayala.
No.
Brown.
Brown, yes.
Dennis,
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson,
No.
Haber,
No.
Haynes,
No.
Ember,
No.
Kirschenbaum,
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoy,
Lavoy, yes.
Longbelial,
Yes.
Michalowski,
No.
Mills, yes. Mitchell. I'm sorry, Otmar,
Otmar, yes.
Silva,
No.
Smith,
Smith, yes.
Weeks,
Yes.
Woodland,
Yes.
and Young.
No.
So what is our call? What is our number? Rebecca?
I'm coming.
No, it's okay.
Hold on. Ah, I'm running on the AC.
Ken, did you vote?
I did. I said yes.
Okay.
Okay, we have 18 there. 10 yes, 8 no.
So motions to move the question, we require 2/3 majority. So that fails. So we go back to the motion on the floor. Discussion order on the floor. I think I'm sorry, Linda Woodland, you had, we're going to pass, right? Member Lavoy, did you have something else? Or was that to call the question?
I just wanted to make a point of clarification that I think people are confusing that this $450,000 is going to save a job before June 30th. And it's my understanding that no decisions are going to be made on cuts. And furthermore, I think when Deputy Director Dede was asked a question where this would go, he specifically said it would go into revenue. He did not say it would go into salaries or adjustments for any specific personnel. So I just want people to be clear about that it's going into revenues.
Right. That's correct. Member Michalowski?
Yeah, so, I think I share frustration of a lot of the committee in that I feel like administration has been slow to provide us opportunity to have these conversations at a time when we're not always backs against a wall to have to make a decision right up against a deadline or a last minute. And I have that frustration, and I share that if that is the feeling of other folks. However, in thinking about the impact of pushing this decision off, even for 2 more weeks or 3 more weeks until we have our next meeting, those are real dollars, right? I mean, it's unfortunate we don't have an answer about transportation, or we don't have a better sense of where other things may be landing. But to get us to the point where we would be able to seek the number where Daryl was going to be cutting with regard to pink slipping teachers by the 15th, that's still going to happen. And now we're going to have to find additional monies to get to that revenue spot. So I would support the use of E&D, though I am very uncomfortable with it. My thought would be that as a committee, we could really guide the administration if transportation came in higher than anticipated or something came in higher than anticipated to help. We would guide the administration strongly to end with an excess in the next fiscal year that we could then recertify to build E&D back up for future issues. Like, I think that there is a timeliness to making sure that there's as much information, for as much frustration as I feel not having the information to make an educated decision as a school committee member. I think that we are hamstringing the administration to a degree if we don't give them the information they need about the funds that they're really going to have in the best degree that they have. So those are my 2 thoughts.
All right, Member Kirschenbaum.
If there's no other comments that are going to be made, I'll just lower my hand.
Okay. So Linda?
Ken? Yes. I'd like to move that we, and help me with the phrasing here. I'd like to move that we amend the motion on the floor to change the amount proposed to take from E&D from $450,000 to $250,000.
Unfortunately, that motion right now isn't in order because the motion on the floor is the motion to postpone to a time definite.
Oh, sorry.
That's what we're discussing. So if that fails, then you're free to make that motion.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So the motion on the floor again is to postpone to a time definite, being June 30th. There's no other hands I see. So that said, this requires a simple majority because we're not voting up or down the original motion. So we'll start again with Member Ayala.
Ayala, yes.
Brown.
Brown, yes.
Dennis.
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson.
No.
Haber.
Yes.
Haynes.
No.
Imber.
No.
Kirschenbaum.
Yes.
Lavoy.
Yes.
Longbalil.
Yes.
Michalowski.
No.
Mills, yes. Mitchell. I'm sorry, Otmar.
Otmar, yes.
Silva.
No.
Smith.
Smith, no.
Weeks.
No.
Woodland.
No.
Young.
Yes.
Okay. Wait for the secretary to tell us the vote.
Ten to 8.
10 to 8 what?
I'm sorry, 10 in favor, 8 no.
All right, so 10 in favor to postpone the motion to a time forward, being June 30th. So this will reappear as a motion as written on the June 30th meeting agenda, and it can be debated if it's brought to the floor. It can be debated, amended at that time. So the next item on the agenda, I believe, is actually written in an incorrect way. So I'm going to change what I ask someone to make, and I'll ask Daryl's clarification on this. I will ask someone to make a recommendation that the superintendent determines and notifies staff of reduction in force due to expected cuts to fiscal year 21 state revenue due to COVID-19 crisis by June 15th, 2020. I changed that language to what's on the agenda because he doesn't actually require our permission to do this. It's been tradition to take these votes. So is there a maker of the motion to recommend the superintendent to determine and notify staff of reduction in force due to expected cuts to fiscal year 21 state revenue due to COVID-19 crisis by June 15, 2020?
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. And Daryl, is my understanding correct of that legally?
Yes, it is, Ken. So I did speak with Naomi about that a couple times.
Then what did I?
So I've lost track of when the hands went up. I think, Member Kirschenbaum, this was the previous motion, right?
That's correct. Yep.
So Member Lavoy, I see a hand. Member Longbalil, I see you unmuted. So Lavoy, Longbalil.
So it's my understanding that teachers were already notified of this, so I'm not sure why we're having this conversation right now.
Superintendent, do you have I have no idea about that.
Yeah, I don't think teachers were notified because we haven't actually had letters that have been drafted and sent out yet to any individuals.
Okay, I'm reading a post right now in social media that says there was a list generated and principals sat down with teachers today. So I'm against a motion where actions are actually already happened. Really takes the power out of the school committee's hand to have a conversation about something where action is happening behind the scenes.
Okay, that's news to me. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, I can point you to it. It's on social media.
Thank you.
All right, Member Haber. I'm sorry, Member Longbalil, I'd recognized you. Did you have something?
No, I don't. I just was unmuting.
Okay.
No.
Member Haber. Just says she says that she saw that she read the same thing. And again, the spirit of why we put this motion on the agenda was just because, we authorize budgets, we approve creations of positions. I feel it's our responsibility to have a conversation, which we've had, of course, about pink slips, even if it's not our authority to give. Member Gustafson?
Well, my question is, again, I wonder if what was just said is happening across the district, or perhaps there is one school that has done this, and I think there's a difference there. We've seen throughout this process that there seems to be one or two schools that are doing things ahead of time in this whole remote learning process. I won't name names, but there have been a couple. They've been in the same towns consistently that are doing things or telling their families things ahead of schedule. So I wonder if it's one or two schools, then I think it makes sense to still go ahead with this because the rest of the towns are not doing that. So I guess that's my clarification. I don't know where that leaves us, but it's a question.
So can I just get clarification that it was one school in particular, the one principal shared information with today?
That would be consistent with what's happened throughout the remote learning, where there was one school in particular that we were hearing new things. So in that case, I think it would be prudent to still continue with this process for the rest of the schools. And very unfortunate that that has happened again. So I would put that back to you, Daryl, that hopefully you can perhaps have a conversation with that principal. Yeah, I'm assuming it's the same school based on the people that have seen it. I have a pretty good idea of which school it probably is. And I would hope that you could perhaps have a conversation with them about discussing things before their public knowledge. Thank you.
This is Member Longbalil. Now I do have a comment, which is I agree with Member Gustafson. And I just want to note that it's not official until those letters go out. So.
Okay, so was there any other discussion on the floor? This is a brutal vote that we've discussed quite a bit. Member Weeks?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to unmute myself.
Okay. All right, seeing none, this is just a motion to recommend. So this requires a simple majority. Member Brown, I'm sorry, you're just unmuting yourself probably to vote. Member Ayala?
Yes.
Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson?
Yes.
Haber?
Yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Imber?
Imber, yes.
Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoy?
No.
Longbalil?
Yes.
Michalowski?
Yes.
Mills, yes. Otmar?
Yes.
Silva?
Yes.
Smith?
Smith, yes.
Weeks?
Yes.
Woodland?
Yes.
And Young?
Yes.
Yeah. So I wonder this was the worst meeting we'll have. Next on the agenda is authorize a budget transfer of $4,718.41 from the debt service appropriation to the pupil service appropriation. Dennis moved, said yes. Weeks. Dennis moved. Weeks second. Member Dennis, can you quickly restate what you said before?
So these are, and Dan can certainly speak to more detail if folks need it, but the spirit of these moves, the majority of them, there's oftentimes at the end of the year, we need to have fund balances not end in a negative, number one. But number two, some of these moves are in an effort to move funds to where we're journaling out of revolving funds and back into general funds. At the end of the day, the net effect of this is for us to not end in a negative balance and to be able to accrue as many dollars into revolving accounts to be able to use for next year as we can.
All right, Mr. Dede, do you have anything to this particular motion or this series of motions?
This motion here is to address the deficit in the pupil services appropriation. What Mike is referring to will be spoken to in the next motion.
Yeah, I was really speaking about the collective motion overall. But
that's correct.
Are there questions from the floor about the motion on the floor? Seeing none, this requires simple majority. Member Ayala?
Yes.
Brown?
Brown, yes.
Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson?
Yes.
Haber?
Yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Imber?
Imber, yes.
Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoy?
Lavoy, yes.
Longbalil?
Yes.
Michalowski?
Yes.
Mills, yes. Otmar?
Yes.
Silva?
Yes.
Smith?
Smith, yes.
Weeks?
Yes.
Woodland,
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
That's approved. Next motion is the floor is for a member to make a motion to authorize a budget transfer of $181.33 from the debt service appropriation to the benefits and insurance appropriation. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Haber moves.
Second.
And there's a second from Member Kirschenbaum. Dan.
Again, this is the first example of what Mike was speaking to a moment ago, where we're looking to build up the balance in benefits and insurance to make the adjustments between school choice and general fund, thereby building up a carry forward in school choice for 21.
Are there other questions or comments? Seeing none, Member Ayala.
Ayala, yes.
Brown.
Brown, yes.
Dennis.
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson.
Yes.
Haber.
Yes.
Haynes.
Yes.
Kimber.
Yes.
Kirschenbaum.
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoy.
Lavoy, yes.
Longbaleal.
Yes.
Michalowski.
Yes.
Mills, yes. Otmar.
Yes.
Silva.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes. Smith, yes.
Weeks.
Yes.
Woodland.
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
Okay, so that passes. The next item on the agenda is for someone to make a motion to authorize a budget transfer of $150,000 from the salaries and stipends appropriation to the benefits and insurance appropriation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Member Longbaleal. Is there a second?
Second.
And second, I think, by Member Kirschenbaum.
Yep.
So Dan.
And again, the same as the previous motion to transfer these dollars from savings and salaries and stipends to benefits and insurance to, again, to build up the balance in there.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further conversation about the motion on the floor? Seeing none. Member Ayala.
Ayala, yes.
Brown.
Brown, yes.
Dennis.
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson.
Yes.
Haber.
Yes.
Haynes.
Yes.
Imber.
Yes.
Kirschenbaum.
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoy.
Lavoy, yes.
Longbaleal.
Yes.
Michalowski.
Yes.
Mills, yes. Otmar.
Yes.
Silva.
Yes.
Smith.
Smith, yes.
Weeks.
Yes.
Woodland.
Yes.
And Young.
Yes.
So that passes. Next item on the agenda is for someone to make a motion to authorize a budget transfer of $600,000 from the transportation appropriation to the benefits and insurance appropriation.
So moved.
So moved by Member Haber. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Member Longbaleal. Dan, anything?
There was an uncommon balance in transportation through the end of May of $620,941, and so we're looking to take $600,000 of that and again to move into benefits insurance to help us make the adjustments between school choice and the general fund and carry those dollars forward out of school choice.
And this isn't related at all to any conversations with the bus company?
No.
Are there questions or comments on the floor? Seeing none, Member Ayala.
Ayala, yes.
Brown.
Brown, yes.
Dennis.
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson.
Yes.
Haber.
Yes.
Haynes.
Yes.
Imber.
Limber, yes.
Kirschenbaum.
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Roy.
I had a question.
We are voting. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I missed your question, Matt. I apologize. I didn't see it, but you did start asking that before the scroll call went. So I'll allow that, Matt.
I just had a question on that number. What is that? We're transferring money out of transportation. What is that excess? What caused that excess in that number?
We haven't made payments, obviously, to our SPED providers and our home to school providers since mid-March. And I apologize. That 620 does. I apologize. That does reflect the adjustment to the home to school. I apologize for that. So there were dollars that were adjusted. The encumbrances were adjusted to reflect the 75% payment. So I apologize for that.
So I'm gonna eliminate the vote we started taking since the question came up in the middle of that, just in case anyone wants to follow up on that question. Again, that's my fault as chair. I didn't see the question. It was asked in time. Is there a follow-up on Member LaVoy's question is kind of my question too. All right, someone's microwaving. So I see no further questions, I think, this time. So I just want to restart the vote just because more information had been passed. Member Ayala?
Ayala, yes.
Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Godbout? I'm sorry, Gustafson?
Yes.
Haber?
Haber, yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Imber?
Imber, yes.
Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
LaVoy?
LaVoy, yes.
Monbalil?
Yes.
Michalowski?
Yes.
Mills, no. Otmar?
Yes.
Silva?
Yes.
Smith?
Smith, yes.
Weeks?
Yes.
Woodland?
Yes.
And Young?
Yes.
So that motion passes. Next item on the agenda is a motion to authorize a budget transfer of $250,000 from the undesignated fund balance to Fund Code 30, Project 1002, line item WLT 452 to cover the field turf project. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Monbalil moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Haber seconds. Dan, I think this is a different type of motion. Can you explain?
It is. This is the end result of our excess and deficiency work this past winter. We took a hit of approximately $250,000 because when we did the work last year and we took money out of E&D, we did not allocate it to a particular capital account. At the advice of the Department of Revenue, we were told that if we do not assign this $250,000 to a fund, that we would take a second hit of $250,000 when we have our FY20 dollars certified through the E&D process.
Does people have follow-up on that? Mike, was this discussed at Business and Finance?
Yes, it was.
Okay, let's scroll my screen over to make sure I see questions this time. Are there questions about the motion on the floor? All right, I'm seeing none. So Member Ayala. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Melissa. Was it yes?
Yes.
Okay. Brown?
Brown, yes.
Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson?
Yes.
Haber?
Haber, yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
Imber?
Yes.
Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
LaVoy?
LaVoy, yes.
Monbalil?
Yes.
Michalowski?
Yes.
Mills, yes. Otmar?
Yes.
Silva?
Yes.
Smith?
Smith, yes.
Weeks?
Yes.
Woodland?
Yes.
And Young?
Yes.
All right, so next on the agenda is unfinished business. We don't have any officially unfinished business, although obviously we have a lot of work to do. Secretary's report, I'll take a motion to pass over the executive session minutes. I do hope that our next chair figures out a way with the secretary to get these passed in a timely manner, even in a remote world, but we haven't been shared those minutes as yet. So next item is approval of the 1344th regular meeting minutes of the Wachusett Regional School District Committee held on May 26th, 2020 and closed with the call to meeting. Do I have a motion?
I think Member Dennis had a point of order, Ken.
I'm sorry, Member Dennis, do you have a point? I got to
Yeah,
scroll down.
just real quick. We were in double overtime.
Yeah.
We had someone who was signed up for public session.
Okay.
It's been a very long meeting. I'll leave it to your prerogative, Ken, but I would suggest that we skip over the agenda to second public section, and perhaps skip over the rest of the agenda for this evening if there's nothing that's so terribly critical.
I will accept that in principle in the chair, unless someone wants to make a motion to overrule the chair. The one item that I think I can't pass over before we get there is under the ad hoc subcommittee to negotiate the superintendent's contract, because we voted on this and this was signed. So I feel we have an obligation to release this to the public. That 2 meetings ago, the school committee voted to approve a new 3-year contract with the superintendent. This was only executed last week. So we do have an obligation to report this. So this will replace the old contract and start this July 1st. There is new language for evaluation. There's an element of buying back vacation time. I echo Member Michalowski's hope that the superintendent will consider a leadership position to freeze his wage, but I look forward very much to continue working with the superintendent. I'm glad that after many, many conversations, this was done and completed. So otherwise, I do agree. I'll at least take out of order the public hearing because I really apologize to Heidi and appreciate her putting off after for so long. Not Member Leahy, you probably feel that way. Heidi, do you want to have your public hearing?
Sure. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. I'm not glad the meeting went so long, but I have difficulty shifting to these comments, which were prepared hours and hours ago, following those student comments. It's clear that we have a lot of listening and learning to do as staff and as a community. And I appreciate both the students and the committee members who shared their pain with us so that we can understand and begin to realize just how much work needs to be done. Good evening, Heidi Leahy, 166 Bullard Street, Holden, outgoing president of Wachusett Regional Education Association. I'm here tonight to address comments made at the June 4th business meeting in regards to the district's financial projections and the disappointing response from the 8 employee unions in terms of concessions to address the crisis. In Wachusett, most often the word unions, plural, is code for one union, WREA. Wachusett has 8 unions total. The educators are 55% of the 970 unionized employees. We are aware that decisions that WREA makes on behalf of our members impact all of the other unionized employees. On the cheapest plan, the proposed change in the health insurance split would have raised the increase in employment premiums annually from $129 to $398 on an individual plan, and from $341 to $1,055 on a family plan. That number is only the increase, not the premium total. A starting paraeducator in Wachusett earns $16,204 a year. A paraprofessional with 20 years experience and longevity earns $22,710 a year. Cafeteria workers doing 4-hour days earn $9,231 a year, while the highest paid earn $18,150 a year. Salary concessions made by WREA would increase the pressure on the other bargaining units to agree to similar cuts, further eroding their already inadequate salaries. We stand arm in arm with our sisters and brothers who are all essential school workers. Have you forgotten that we have almost the lowest per pupil funding in the state? That translates into people working harder in Wachusett year in and year out. Do more with less has been a refrain for decades now in public education, and it has certainly been true here. Educators are givers. We dedicate much of our lives and our emotional energy to our students. We spend personal resources to enrich the learning environments, and we buy materials the district does not provide. We live in the communities, pay taxes, and support local businesses. We volunteer in many capacities and in many different organizations. The funding crisis is not up to employees to solve. Without full funding, we, staff and students, will be feeling the loss of $400,000 in textbooks, $70,000 in operation and maintenance, and the loss of 26 new hires intended to improve student support and reduce class sizes. Without full funding, we will be trying to overcome all of the losses in resources and the effects of remote learning and the trauma of the pandemic. as we cope with whatever social distancing looks like in schools. This is a national catastrophe that requires massive governmental investment. Combined concessions, while devastating to the personal finances of individual employees, would not be enough to prevent the coming disaster or save the jobs of our colleagues. But I would invite any of you who wish to make a $5,600 contribution, which is what my losses in salary and earnings would be, to feel free to do the same to save the district. We will not be complicit in even suggesting that schools can safely reopen in fall and educate children under these financial constraints. We are not going to perpetuate the myth that exists in the towns that schools have enough resources to do the job and we can give money back. We intend to fight for the funding that is going to be needed because we know we are essential workers who hold the keys to reopening the economy for working parents. Children and families need and deserve fully funded public schools. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I just also wanted to thank you for your service over the years as WREA president. I know it's an awful lot of work. So we're almost out of time. I know I'm going to take one more thing out of order. Member Gustafson has an important thing from CPAC, if we can get that quickly.
I will send it in writing, but they sent me a concern statement. The officers had a meeting this week and had concerns about the district summer services and the plan to offer 1/3 of the services, as well as remote learning, which has not been successful for all families. And is their plan for the summer? They did ask that I relay that, and I will send it in writing as well. Just, I know you're working on summer service plans, so that may all change. So.
All right, so our options at the moment is if someone wishes to make a motion to extend the meeting, we can entertain that and go through the rest of our agenda. But we would require such a motion to extend the meeting past 11 o'clock.
Ken, move to adjourn.
Second.
Member Atmar makes a motion to adjourn, which has been seconded. So is there discussion on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, Member Ayala.
Yes.
Brown. Dennis.
Dennis, yes. Ken, great job.
Thank you. Godbout. Oh, he's gone. Gustafson.
No. Gustafson, yes.
Haber.
Haber, yes.
Haynes.
Yes.
Imber.
Imber, yes, and thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Kirschenbaum.
Thank you, Ken. Yes.
Lavoy. Not sure if Matt's still here. Long-Balil.
Yes, and you've been terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. Michalowski.
Yes, thanks, Ken.
Mills, yes. Atmar.
Atmar, yes.
Silva.
Yes, for you, Ken, so we can go to bed.
Smith.
Smith, yes.
Weeks.
Yes, and many thanks, Ken.
Thanks. Woodland.
Yes, and thank you, Ken.
Thanks. And Young.
Yes.
All right. He says that with such finality and such enthusiasm. We are adjourned. Thank you all for what's been a very difficult night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Evan, if you're still there, and Rebecca. It's been a long, long night.